The moment Sophia opened her mouth and spoke Russian, every man in that room stopped breathing. Glasses froze midair. Chairs scraped back. And Alexander Volkov, a man who had not shown surprise in 15 years, turned slowly and looked at her like she had just pulled a gun from nowhere. She was a waitress. She was supposed to be invisible. And she had just understood every word of the conversation that was supposed to get her killed. If this story already has your heart pounding, subscribe to our channel and follow Sophia's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Sophia Bennett had spent 3 years perfecting the art of being forgotten. Not because she was boring, not because she lacked ambition, but because in the world she had accidentally walked into being forgotten was the safest thing a person could be. The conversation that started it had been nothing. That was the word she kept returning to. Nothing. She had mentioned quietly over dinner that her coworker Priya had invited her to a birthday dinner the following weekend. She had not even said yes. She had simply mentioned it. And Daniel had put down his fork. He had looked at her the way he always looked at her when she forgot the rules and said, "You're not seriously considering going." "I was just mentioning it," she had said. "Right," he said. "You were just mentioning it." The silence after that was its own kind of punishment. She had learned that too. The silence was designed to make her fill it. And when she filled it, she usually said something wrong. "I thought it might be nice," she said. "I haven't seen Priya outside of work in months." "Because you've been busy," Daniel said. "Because we have a life together. Because not everything is about what's nice for you." She had not argued. She had started clearing the plates. And that was when he crossed the room and grabbed her wrist. He had done it before, always the wrist, always with just enough pressure that she could feel exactly how much stronger he was. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, she did not apologize. She did not soften her voice and redirect the conversation. She looked at him and said very quietly, "Let go of me." The look on his face in the moment after she said that was something she would not forget for a long time. It was not anger. It was something closer to surprise, and then recalculation, and then a cold, controlled kind of fury that was far more frightening than rage. He let go. He said nothing. He walked away, and she had retreated to the bathroom and locked the door and sat on the floor with her phone in her lap, understanding for the first time with total clarity that she was not safe. That she had not been safe for a very long time. And that the way she had been surviving quietly, carefully making herself smaller with every passing month was not survival at all. It was disappearance. She scrolled through her contacts. Her sister was in Portland. They hadn't really talked in over a year. Daniel had a way of occupying those conversations, being present, even when he wasn't in the room. So that when Elena finished a phone call with her sister, she felt vaguely guilty without knowing exactly why. Her friend Carla had stopped calling after Daniel told Elena pleasantly, reasonably, that Carla seemed like someone who didn't have a lot of respect for committed relationships. Elena had not argued that point either. She kept scrolling, and then she stopped. Adrian Voss. She stared at the name for a long moment. She had worked for Adrian for 5 years. Executive assistant to a man who ran a private empire so layered and complex that most people in his outer orbit had no real idea what he did, only that the name Voss had a specific weight in certain rooms that made other powerful men sit up straighter. She had scheduled his meetings, managed his correspondence, coordinated his travel-fielded calls from people who were very clearly afraid of him, and sat across from him in conferences where words like leverage and exposure and liability were used in ways that meant something different than their dictionary definitions. She had told herself for 5 years that what Adrian Voss did was none of her business. Her job was to keep his schedule running. Everything else was not her concern. She had also told herself for 5 years that she did not know him, that the Adrian who occasionally asked about her weekend, or remembered without being reminded that she took her coffee with exactly 1 sugar and preferred it at a specific temperature, that Adrian was simply a man being professional. She did not know him. She worked for him. But she had his number. And right now at 1:13 in the morning, with Daniel pacing the hallway, and the weight of 2 years pressing down on her chest. Like something she had been breathing around for so long, she'd forgotten what regular air felt like, she called it. 1 ring. 2. Who is this? Not a question. A statement. Low, unhurried, like a man who received calls at this hour often enough that he had stopped being startled by them. It's Elena, she said. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, I'm sorry. I know it's late. Elena. A pause. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But something in the quality of it shifted. Where are you? I'm at home. She pressed her lips together. At the apartment. I need... She stopped. She heard her own voice fragmented and thin, and she felt a sudden wave of shame so powerful it almost made her hang up. Because what was she going to say? That she was hiding in a bathroom from the man she had agreed to build a life with. That she was calling her employer in the middle of the night because she was afraid of her own hallway. I'm sorry, she said again. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have... Stop apologizing. His voice was quiet, but it had a quality that did not leave room for argument. Tell me what you need. She squeezed her eyes shut. Please, she said. Please come get me. The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. She counted them. Text me the address, he said. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't open the door until I call you. The line went quiet. She sat there for a moment staring at nothing, and then she texted him the address with hands that were barely shaking at all. Adrian Voss arrived in 12 minutes. She knew because she had been watching the clock on her phone, sitting on the bathroom floor with her knees drawn up and her back against the door, tracking each minute the way someone tracks their breathing when everything else feels out of control. His call came when she had started to think she had imagined the conversation. I'm outside, he said. Black car, front of the building. Is he between you and the door? She listened. The pacing had stopped sometime in the last few minutes. She could hear the television now, which meant Daniel had moved to the living room. No, she said. I think he's in the front of the apartment. Then take the hallway to the left. Building exit is on that side. Don't engage with him. Don't explain yourself. Don't stop walking. What if he... If he moves toward you, keep walking anyway and call out my name, loudly. I'll hear you. A beat. Elena. What? I'm right outside. You understand me. I am right outside that door. She stood up. She unlocked the bathroom door as quietly as she could manage and stepped into the hallway. The television was on in the living room. She could see the blue light of it flickering against the far wall, and for a moment, she saw Daniel's silhouette seated very still facing away from her. She walked. She did not look at him. She did not look at anything except the far end of the hallway and the front door at the end of it. She picked up her bag from the hook by the entrance where she always left it, and she opened the door, and she stepped outside, and she pulled it closed behind her with a soft, final click. She was in the lobby. She was walking. She pushed through the building's front door and stepped into the night air, and there was a black car at the curb with the engine running, and before she had taken 2 steps toward it, the driver's side door opened, and Adrian Voss stepped out. He looked at first glance exactly the way he always looked. Controlled, unhurried, dressed well. The kind of man whose stillness read as power rather than patience. He was not a man who moved unless he meant to, and right now he was moving toward her with a quiet, deliberate purpose that she had never in 5 years seen directed at her. He stopped a few feet away. He looked at her face, then at her wrist which she was holding against her side, then at her face again. He said nothing for a moment. Get in, he said finally. Let's go. Adrian, you can explain in the car, or you can explain tomorrow, or you don't have to explain at all. He held the passenger door open. But right now, I need you in this car. She got in. He drove without asking where she wanted to go. She sat in the passenger seat with her bag in her lap and watched the city move past the window and tried to organize her thoughts into something that would sound reasonable. something that would explain tonight without making her sound like a woman who had spent 2 years walking on eggshells and only just noticed the sound. "How long?" Adrian said. She looked at him. He was watching the road. His hands were steady on the wheel. His voice was completely neutral. "How long has it been happening?" he said. She opened her mouth to deflect, to say it wasn't that serious, to say tonight was unusual, that Daniel wasn't normally like this, that she might have overreacted. She had the sentences ready. She had been rehearsing them for a long time. 2 years, she said instead. He nodded once. "Where does it hurt?" he said. She looked at her wrist. She had been keeping it still against her side, because the joint was swollen and tender, not broken. She was fairly certain it wasn't broken, but wrong enough that she had been protecting it without realizing she was doing it. "My wrist," she said. "It's not serious. He just grabbed it." Adrian's jaw moved slightly. That was the only thing that changed about his expression. "I'm taking you to my house," he said. "You can stay as long as you need. I'll have someone look at your wrist tonight." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He glanced at her just for a moment, then back at the road. "I'm choosing to." She wanted to say that she didn't want to be a burden. She wanted to say she would figure something out, that she had options, that she didn't need to impose on him. She had a very long list of things she always said when someone offered her help, because accepting help had started to feel somewhere in the last 2 years, like admitting a weakness that Daniel could use against her later. Instead, she looked out the window and said, "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Go to sleep if you can." She couldn't sleep. She sat in the passenger seat and looked at the lights of the city, and thought about all the small moments she had told herself were nothing. The dinner parties Daniel had steered her away from attending. The friends whose calls she had stopped returning because it was simply easier not to deal with Daniel's reaction afterward. The job offer she had been approached with 14 months ago, a coordinator position with a firm, uptown, more responsibility, better title, that she had turned down without ever telling anyone she'd been offered it, because Daniel had spent a week explaining to her very reasonably that she was not ready for that kind of pressure, and he was only looking out for her. She had believed him. That was the part she was having difficulty with. Not that he had said those things, but that she had believed them. That she had chosen again and again to interpret his control as concern and his cruelty as protection. Because the alternative, that she had given 2 years of her life to a man who was systematically dismantling her, was a truth she had not been ready to hold. She was holding it now. It was heavier than she expected, but it was also clarifying. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Adrian looked at her briefly. "At the office," she said. "You always knew when I was having a difficult day. You never said anything directly, but you would give me space without making it obvious. I always wondered if that was deliberate." "It was deliberate," he said. "How did you know?" He was quiet for a moment. "You have a way of holding yourself when something is wrong," he said. "Your shoulders are always level when you're fine. When you're not, there's about a quarter-inch difference." He paused. "I noticed it more often than I should have." She absorbed that. "You never said anything," she said. "It wasn't my place." He kept his eyes on the road. "You hadn't asked for help. People are allowed to handle their own lives. I don't push myself into situations I haven't been invited into. And tonight you invited me." She turned back to the window. She didn't say anything else for a long time. Neither did he. But the silence was not uncomfortable. It was simply the silence of two people who had spent 5 years being professionally careful with each other and were now somewhere entirely different. His home was exactly what she would have expected from a man like Adrian Voss, and nothing at all like what she would have expected from a person. The building was secured. The elevator opened into a private floor. The space was large and impeccably ordered, with the kind of deliberate arrangement that spoke less of decoration and more of a person who needed their physical environment to match their internal structure. Everything had a place. Everything was in it. But there were books everywhere. That was the thing she noticed first. Not art, not displays of wealth, not the kind of curated emptiness that expensive apartments in this city often cultivated. Books. On shelves that ran floor to ceiling, and on the coffee table, and stacked on the narrow console in the entry hall. A half-finished glass of water with a paperback laid face down beside it, which meant he had been reading when she called. She looked at that glass of water for a moment. Adrian Voss at 1 a.m. reading. She had worked for him for 5 years, and she had not known that. "Sit down," he said. "I'll get someone to look at your wrist. Are you hungry?" "No." "When did you last eat?" She thought about it. The dinner she'd started clearing away. She'd had 2 bites before things unraveled. "Earlier," she said. He gave her a look that said he did not find that answer satisfying, but was not going to argue with her about it right now, and then he disappeared down a hallway. She heard the low sound of him speaking on the phone, not loud enough to make out words, just the cadence of a man giving instructions to someone who was very accustomed to receiving them. She sat on the edge of the couch and looked at her wrist. It was swollen. Not dramatically, but enough that she could feel the difference. She rotated it carefully and winced. "Don't do that." She looked up. Adrian had returned, and he was watching her with an expression that was not quite stern, and not quite concerned, but landed somewhere in the middle. "Stop moving it," he said. "Someone's coming to look at it." "You have a doctor who makes house calls at 1 a.m. "I have a doctor who owes me several favors," he said. He sat down across from her, not close with the deliberate distance of someone who understood the specific value of personal space. "Now tell me what happened tonight." She told him. Not the edited version. Not the version where Daniel's behavior sounded contextual and defensible. The actual version. Beginning with the dinner, moving backward through months and years of small confiscations, the friends she had drifted away from, the confidence she had stopped feeling, the way her own internal voice had gradually started to sound exactly like Daniel's, full of preemptive doubts and preloaded explanations for why she was not quite enough and never quite ready. Adrian listened without interrupting. When she finished, the room was very quiet. "He told you the job offer wasn't right for you," Adrian said finally. She blinked. "How did you know about that?" "Because I was the one who arranged it," he said. She stared at him. "The firm uptown, Sterling Consulting. Richard Holt is a friend of mine. I suggested your name because you were ready 3 years before that, and I was watching you flatten yourself to fit a role that was too small for you." His voice was entirely even. "When you turned it down without explanation, I assumed you had made a different choice for your own reasons. I did not assume anyone had made it for you." She could not speak for a moment. "You arranged that job offer," she said. "Yes, you never told me." "It wasn't a favor with strings attached. If you'd taken it, you never would have known it came from me." Something shifted slightly in his expression. "If I had known what was happening in your life at the time, I would have handled things differently." "How differently?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I would have asked," he said simply. The doctor arrived at 1:47 a.m. She was a compact, efficient woman named Dr. Ewan, who clearly had considerable experience with Adrian Voss's 1 a.m. requests and had developed a manner that was professional to the point of being almost imperceptibly warm. She examined Elena's wrist with careful hands, confirmed that nothing was fractured, wrapped it with practiced speed, and gave her an ice pack and a set of instructions about inflammation that Elena absorbed, without being able to later recall the specific words. When Dr. Ewan left, Adrian returned with a plate of food he set on the table in front of Elena without comment. She looked at it. "I said I wasn't hungry," she said. "You also haven't eaten since before a crisis," he said. "Your body doesn't care about your preferences right now." She picked up the fork. The food was simple eggs toast, something that might have been left from his own earlier meal, and it was exactly what her body needed, and the fact that she could tell the difference between what her body needed and what she would normally have refused out of a habit of self-negation was itself something she was going to have to sit with for a while. She ate. He sat across from her and said nothing. He did not check his phone. He did not look impatient. He simply sat there with a kind of quiet, steady presence that she had always noticed in him from a professional distance, and was now experiencing up close, and it felt nothing like what she had expected. She had expected control. She had worked for a powerful man long enough to know that powerful men occupied space in a particular way, managing silences, directing attention, making sure even their stillness communicated authority. This was not that. This was simply a man who was in no hurry, who had nowhere else to be, who had made a decision to be present and was being exactly that without requiring anything from her in return. It made her want to cry. She didn't. She finished the food instead. "Chum, can I ask you something else?" she said. He had moved to the chair by the window and was nursing a glass of something looking out at the city. He had not turned on all the lights. The room was partially lit, which should have felt unsettling, and instead felt like permission to be tired. "You can ask me anything," he said. "Do you think I knew?" She set down the empty plate. "On some level. Do you think I knew what was happening and chose not to see it?" He was quiet for a moment. "I think people protect themselves with the understanding they're ready for," he said. "I don't think that's the same as knowing." "But I'm smart," she said. "I'm supposed to be smart." "Elena." He turned from the window. "Being intelligent doesn't protect you from someone who's specifically working to undermine your ability to trust yourself. Those are different skills." He held her gaze for a moment. "He had 2 years to learn exactly how you think. He used that to stay ahead of you. That's not your failure. That's his strategy." She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry. She had decided that before she got in his car, and she was committed to it. "Why did you come?" she said. "Tonight, when I called. You could have sent someone, or told me to call the police. Or, I came because you called me," he said, simply, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. "I'm your employee. You're a person I've worked beside for 5 years who sounded frightened." He looked at her steadily. "I don't require a more specific reason than that." She looked down at her wrapped wrist. "He's going to be angry," she said, "when he realizes I didn't come back." "Yes," Adrian said. "He will be. He'll contact me. He always does. The calls, the messages, the explanations. He's very good at making things sound reasonable. He'll find a way to—" "You don't have to answer him." Adrian's voice was quiet, but had a particular quality she recognized from years of watching him close conversations. Certain. Final, but not heavy. "You don't have to respond to anything from him. Not yet. Not until you're ready." "He'll call my job," she said. Then she stopped because she suddenly remembered that her job was sitting 4 feet away from her. A very slight, very controlled something passed across Adrian's face. It was almost not an expression at all. "Let him try," he said. She slept. She had not expected to, but the guest room was quiet, and the sheets were clean, and at some point around 3 a.m., the exhaustion of the last 5 hours, and she suspected the last 2 years, simply overtook her. She woke to gray morning light and the sound of someone moving carefully in the next room, the particular quiet of a person deliberately not making noise because they do not want to wake someone. She lay still for a moment and looked at the ceiling and took inventory. The wrist was less tender than last night. The sharp, disorienting fear of the bathroom floor had settled into something flatter and stranger. She felt very specifically like a person who had walked off the edge of something and was still in the air, not yet sure whether the fall would be catastrophic or survivable. Her phone had 14 messages from Daniel. She looked at the notification count without opening any of them. Then she set the phone face down on the nightstand and got up. "Dr. R." Adrian was in the kitchen when she found him. He was already dressed, clearly having been up for some time, with coffee on, and a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, which she found inexplicably steadying, spread on the counter in front of him. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "Coffee?" he said. "Or I can make tea. 1 sugar, right temperature." She almost laughed. "How do you know my coffee order? I've been watching you make your coffee for 5 years. he said without any self-consciousness about the admission. He turned and poured a cup and set it where she could reach it. How did you sleep? Surprisingly well. She pulled out a stool and sat. He sent 14 messages. Adrian looked at her. Did you read them? No. Something in his expression shifted very slightly in a way she couldn't name exactly. Not approval, not quite. More like relief. Good, he said. He'll escalate when I don't respond, she said. That's how he works. The silence is never allowed to be mine. He always finds a way to make it about him, to make it about what I'm doing to him by not answering. I know people like that, Adrian said. How do you handle them? He picked up his own coffee. Depends on what they're protecting, he said. What does Daniel Cross stand to lose if you leave him? She opened her mouth to say not much, because for 2 years she had been operating on the internal assumption that she was the dependent one, that she needed Daniel, that Daniel was the stabilizing force in her life, and she was the variable. Then she stopped. She thought about the financial accounts she technically shared access to, but had never looked at closely because Daniel handled the finances. She thought about the apartment which was in both their names, which she had been paying into for 2 years. She thought about the contacts she had maintained through her professional life, the access she had given Daniel to her network, without realizing she was doing it, the conversations she had heard him have on the phone in the other room in which he had dropped her name, in contexts she had never fully understood. I don't know, she said slowly. Adrian set down his cup. I think that's worth finding out, he said. The call from Daniel came at 9:14 a.m. She was sitting across from Adrian in the kitchen, both of them quiet over coffee, when her phone lit up on the counter, where she had placed it face up after her second cup. The name on the screen was Daniel. She looked at it. You don't have to answer, Adrian said. I know, she said. She looked at the phone for 3 more rings, then she picked it up. Elena. Daniel's voice was exactly what she had expected. Controlled. Tired sounding in a calculated way. Where are you? Somewhere safe, she said. A pause. Recalculation. I was worried about you, he said. You left without saying anything. I've been up all night. Daniel? If this is about last night, I understand you were upset, but I think we need to have a real conversation. I think you reacted to something that... I'm not coming home, she said. Silence. When he spoke again, the tired and concerned register was still there, but something underneath it had sharpened, just slightly, just enough for her to catch it because she knew his voice the way she knew his footsteps by the variations, not the notes. Where are you staying? He said. That's not something I'm going to tell you right now. Elena, be reasonable. You walked out in the middle of the night without any of your things, without telling me where you were going. I had my phone and my bag, she said. I have everything I need right now. This is not like you, he said. And there it was, that phrase, that particular move, the loving and reasonable redirect back to a version of her that he had constructed and curated, and which was, she now understood, nothing more than a cage with pleasant upholstery. You're not thinking clearly. Whatever you're feeling, we can work through it. That's what you do in a relationship. You don't just leave. I'll be in touch when I'm ready, she said. Don't call me again before then. She hung up. Her hand was steady. Across the table, Adrian was watching her. That's not the call he expected you to make, he said. No, she agreed. He'll try a different approach next time. I know. She set the phone down. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not trying to guess which one. She looked at Adrian, who was looking back at her with an expression she had never had reason to see him direct at her in 5 years of professional closeness, and which she recognized with a sharp and sudden clarity as the look of a man who was seeing someone more accurately than they saw themselves. I need to know what I signed, she said. In the apartment, in the accounts, everything with my name on it, I need to know what it actually says. Adrian nodded slowly. I can have someone go through it with you, he said. I also need to know, she continued, If Daniel has ever used my name professionally, with your company, with your contacts, with anything connected to your business." She paused. "Because I think he might have. And I think that's why you need to know too." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Not dramatically, but the careful, restrained concern that had been there since she had gotten in his car the night before settled into something sharper and more specific. "When did you start thinking that?" he said. "About 45 minutes ago," she said, "when you asked me what he stood to lose." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "I'll make some calls," he said. "So will I," she said. She picked up her coffee, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt the precise, specific weight of a decision that was entirely her own. The calls from Daniel stopped at 11:23 a.m. That was the part that frightened her more than the 14 messages. Elena had been through enough cycles with Daniel to understand his rhythms. The silence that followed a refusal was never acceptance. It was strategy. It was Daniel Cross, sitting somewhere very still, running calculations, identifying which angle of approach she had not yet defended against. The calls stopping meant he had moved on from the emotional appeal and was already 3 steps ahead of where she thought he was. She told Adrian that. He was standing by the window with his phone in his hand, and he listened to her explain Daniel's pattern with the particular quality of attention she had learned to recognize in him, complete, unhurried, the kind of listening that did not perform itself. "You're right to be concerned about the silence," he said. "What does he do next when this happens?" "He goes around me," she said. "He finds someone I trust and he works through them. He's very good at it. He sounds reasonable. He makes the other person feel like they're helping when they're actually delivering his message for him." Who does he have access to in your life right now? She thought about it. Her sister in Portland, who she hadn't really talked to in months. Her colleague Priya, the same Priya whose birthday dinner had started all of this. A few others distant now, people whose numbers were still in her phone, but whose last conversations with her had been brief and somehow always slightly off, as if she'd been watching herself talk to them through a window. "Priya," she said. "He's met her. He was always very charming with her." Adrian nodded and looked back at his phone. "I'll reach out to Richard Holt this afternoon," he said. "The financial records you mentioned, the accounts in both your names. I want a lawyer I trust to look at them before you touch anything." "You think he's moved money?" "I think a man who spent 2 years controlling every variable in your life didn't stop at your schedule and your friendships," Adrian said. "Financial control is usually the last thing to become visible because it's the most useful to maintain." She absorbed that. It landed somewhere in her chest with a specific weight, the kind of thing she would have rejected 3 weeks ago as an overreaction, and now understood as exactly the right shape of the situation. "There's something else," she said. She had been working up to this since breakfast, circling it, the way you circle something that is sharp enough to cut you if you approach it wrong. "When Daniel and I first moved in together, he asked me about my work, about you specifically. He was curious about the business, about what I managed, about who called, and what the calls were about." Adrian was very still. "I told him I couldn't discuss confidential matters," she said. "He accepted that. But he kept asking in small ways. Not aggressive, just curious. And I realize now that I didn't always draw the line as clearly as I thought I did." She looked at her hands. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know. And because I need to understand if I gave him something that he used." The silence in the room was different from the comfortable one they'd settled into over coffee. This one had a different texture, not hostile, not accusatory, but serious in a way that reminded her briefly that Adrian Voss was not simply a careful man with good taste in books. "What kinds of things did he ask about?" Adrian said. "Schedules," she said. "Occasionally who you were meeting with. Once about 8 months ago, he asked about a trip to Chicago, who was traveling with you, whether the meetings were local." "Did you tell him?" "I said it was a business trip and I didn't track the specifics of your itinerary, which was true at the time. You had asked me not to log that particular trip in the standard system." She paused. "He dropped it, but he asked in the first place." Adrian set his phone on the counter. The Chicago trip, he said slowly, was a negotiation with a man named Carl Mercer. Carl has since turned up as a financial backer in 3 different shell companies that have been trying to acquire properties connected to my holdings. He looked at her directly. I always wondered how Mercer knew the timing of that meeting. Elena felt the blood move out of her face. Adrian, I'm not saying this to frighten you, he said, and I'm not assigning blame to you. You didn't know what you didn't know. He came closer and stopped across the counter from her level and unhurried. But I need to understand the scope of what Daniel Cross knows, because if he has been using what he learned through you, then this is not simply about what he did to you, it's about what he was doing to both of us. From the beginning. She put both hands flat on the counter. She was not going to fall apart in his kitchen. She breathed in, breathed out. He was gathering information, she said. The words felt like something being pried out of a sealed container. That's what this was. The relationship. The control. All of it. She looked up. He positioned himself next to me because of who I work for. Adrian didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet and very even. I think that may be a part of it, he said. I also think that whatever his original reasons were, something became more complicated for him along the way. He held her gaze. Controlling someone is not the same as using them strategically. Daniel Cross was doing both. Those are different things. And the distinction matters for what happens next. She did not ask him what he meant by what happens next. Not yet. Because she wasn't sure she was ready for all the answers that would come with that question. Instead, she said, I want to call Priya before Daniel does. Good, Adrian said. Do it now. Priya picked up on the second ring. Elena, are you okay? I saw the missed call and I'm okay, Elena said. I'm not at the apartment. I need you to listen to me for a minute before I explain anything. Okay, I just need you to listen. Okay, Priya said, and the way she said it, quick, unquestioning, made Elena realize that Priya had been waiting for this call for longer than Elena had known she needed to make it. She explained. Not everything, not the depth of it, but the shape of the night before, and where she was now, and what she needed Priya to know. She said Daniel might reach out. She said he would seem reasonable. She said whatever he told Priya about Elena's state of mind should be taken with significant skepticism. There was a silence on Priya's end when she finished. Elena, Priya said, and her voice had changed. He already called. An hour ago. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. What did he say? He said you'd had a breakdown. Priya's voice was careful. That you were not in a good place mentally, and that you had left the apartment in a state, and he was trying to locate you because he was worried about your safety. He asked if I'd heard from you. And I told him no. A pause. Because you hadn't called yet. But Elena, I want to be honest with you. If you hadn't called me in the next hour, I might have started to wonder. I know, Elena said. That's exactly how he works. He's very convincing, Priya said. Quiet, almost ashamed to admit it. Yes, Elena said. He is. He's been convincing me for 2 years. Don't feel bad about almost believing him. Another silence. What do you need from me? Priya asked. Right now, nothing. Just don't answer if he calls again. And if he contacts anyone else from the office, I need to know. I'll watch for it, Priya said. Elena, are you actually safe? Elena looked across the room at Adrian, who was watching her with that same steady, careful attention. Yes, she said. For the first time in a while, actually, yes. She spent the rest of that morning making calls she had been putting off for longer than she could justify. Her sister Camilla answered from Portland in a voice that immediately broke something open in Elena's chest, warm and immediate, and slightly breathless, as if she had been holding a worry in both hands and had just been told she could set it down. "I knew something was wrong," Camilla said. "Every time we talked, you sounded smaller. I didn't know how to say that without making it worse." "You wouldn't have made it worse," Elena said. "He was always on the phone with you," Camilla said. "Or you had to go right after we started talking. I told Marcus I told him something isn't right, but I didn't want to push you." "You could have pushed me. Would you have listened?" Elena thought about that honestly. A year ago, even 6 months ago. "Probably not," she said. "That's what I thought." Camilla's voice dropped. "Are you coming home to Portland? You can stay with us as long as—" "Not yet," Elena said. "I have things I need to do here first. Things I need to understand. But I'll come soon. Okay, I promise." When she hung up, she sat very still for a moment. She had a sister who had been worried about her. She had a friend who had been watching. She had had a support system the entire time, and Daniel had convinced her it wasn't there. Not by taking it away, he had been far too careful for that. By making her doubt the people in it. By making her feel like the need to reach for them was a weakness, an imposition evidence that she wasn't handling her own life well enough. She thought about all the ways she had quietly reinforced that lesson for herself. All the calls she had cut short. All the invitations she had declined. All the moments she had chosen the path of least friction with Daniel over the risk of connection with someone else. It was, she realized, a remarkably efficient system. It was also over. Adrian came back into the room at noon with his jacket on, and a look that meant he had been busy in the way Adrian Voss was busy when something had been set in motion. "I spoke with Paul Reston," he said. Paul Reston was Adrian's attorney. Elena knew the name from years of scheduling calls. "He'll see you this afternoon. He's pulling whatever public records exist for the joint accounts, and he needs you to bring any paperwork you have access to. Lease joint accounts, anything with both your names on it." "I don't have any of it here," she said. "We can get it," he said. "Do you have electronic access to any of the accounts?" "I have a login for one of them," she said. "Daniel manages the main one. I have access to what he called the household account, which I used for groceries and utilities." "Log into it now," Adrian said, "before he does anything with it." She logged in on her phone. The balance was lower than it should have been. Significantly lower. She had deposited her last paycheck into it 2 weeks ago, as she always did, routing her income through the joint account, the way Daniel had suggested when they moved in together, because it was simpler and more organized and made sense as a household system. Her paycheck was not there. She went back through the transaction history. The deposit had cleared, and then 4 days later there was a transfer out. To an account she did not recognize, in the amount of everything she had put in plus a portion of what had already been there. She set the phone on the counter without saying anything. Adrian looked at her face and then at the phone. She turned it toward him without speaking. He looked at the screen for a moment. She watched his jaw set very slightly in the way it had last night when she told him about her wrist. "Forward that to Paul Reston," he said. "The full transaction history, everything from the last 6 months, if you can pull it." "He's been doing this for a while, hasn't he?" she said. Not really a question. "I think so," Adrian said. "Yes." She did not say anything else for a moment, because the thing she was feeling right now was not grief, was not even anger yet. It was something more specific and more strange. The hollow, vertiginous sensation of understanding that an entire structure you have been living inside was built on a plan that had nothing to do with you. That you were not the person in the story you thought you were. That you had been in some very fundamental way a resource. "He's very good at this," she said finally. "Yes," Adrian said. "He had me completely convinced that the only thing wrong with my life was me." She looked up. "The way he operated the isolation, the financial control, the access to my professional network through me, that's not something you improvise. That's a pattern." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "There are people," he said carefully, "who are very skilled at identifying what someone needs most and positioning themselves as the answer to it. You needed stability. You were working in a high-pressure environment and building a career and managing a complicated life alone. He offered you a version of security that felt like exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. A pause. That's not your failure in judgment. That is someone engineering a specific outcome. There's a difference. You make it sound almost clinical, she said. Because I've seen it before, he said. In business, in other contexts. He looked at her steadily. It does not make it less personal, but understanding the mechanism is the first step to not letting it define what comes next. What comes next? She repeated. For you, you meet with Paul this afternoon, you document everything you have access to, and you start building a picture of what Daniel Cross has actually been doing. His voice was level. For him, he will keep escalating, and at some point, the escalation will reveal something he doesn't want revealed. That's always how it goes. People like Daniel rely on the other person staying quiet and uncertain. The moment you stop doing that, they start making mistakes. And what comes next for you? She said. He looked at her. I'm going to find out how much Daniel Cross knows about my business, he said. And I'm going to understand exactly how he came to know it. And then I'm going to deal with Carl Mercer. His voice was completely unchanged from the way he had been talking for the last 12 hours. Quiet, measured, no particular emphasis. But Elena had spent 5 years listening to that voice in professional settings, and she understood now what she had been too politely professional to acknowledge understanding before Adrian Voss. When he said he was going to deal with something, meant it in a way that most people who used that phrase simply did not. She nodded. Okay, she said. Then let's go. Paul Reston was a small, meticulous man who wore his expertise like a comfortable coat and had the particular gift of making catastrophically bad news sound like a logistical problem that could be solved with the right sequence of steps. He shook Elena's hand and offered her coffee and sat across a desk covered in organized stacks of paper and listened to her explain everything she had told Adrian, with additions the full account history she had forwarded from her phone and the lease documents she had accessed online before they left. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, reading something on his screen. The transfer pattern here, he said, is consistent with what's called financial drainage. It's a specific form of coercive control that often accompanies domestic abuse situations. He glanced up at her. I want to be direct with you about something. Based on what I'm seeing, this has been happening systematically for at least 14 months. The transfers were small enough initially to be below the threshold of what would trigger automatic alerts. They became larger over time as he became confident you weren't monitoring closely. Elena sat with that. 14 months, she said. At minimum, Paul said. I'll need forensic access to the full account history to give you a precise figure. But from what you've shared, the initial transfers began approximately 4 months after you moved in together. She did the math. 4 months after they moved in, which meant Daniel had not waited to see how things developed. He had started the moment he had access. How much? She said. Paul told her. She did not visibly react. She had a feeling that if she let herself react fully right now in this office, she would not be able to stop, and she needed to stay functional. What are my options? She said. You have several, Paul said. And you have more leverage than you might think. He folded his hands on the desk. You have documentation. You have transaction records. You have a pattern that is legally recognizable and prosecutable. And if what Adrian has shared with me about the potential business implications is accurate. He glanced at Adrian. Tell her, Adrian said. Paul looked back at Elena. The information about the Chicago meeting that may have been transmitted through Daniel to Carl Mercer, if that information was used to facilitate competing acquisitions, which preliminary evidence suggests it was then Daniel Cross may be facing exposure for industrial espionage. That is a federal matter. He paused. It also substantially increases your leverage in any civil or criminal proceedings related to the financial abuse. Elena looked at Adrian. You knew this before we came in, she said. I suspected it, he said. I didn't know. And now I know, he said. And so do you. She looked back at Paul. "What do I need to do?" she said. "First, we freeze the joint account," Paul said. "Today. I'll handle that. Second, we file for an emergency protective order, which will prevent Daniel from accessing anything in your name while proceedings are underway. Third," he paused. "Third, we let him make his next move." "Why?" "Because Daniel Cross does not know what you know yet," Paul said. "He thinks you left in an emotional state, and he is managing a personal situation. He does not know about the forensic accounting. He does not know about the Mercer connection. And people who don't know what's been discovered tend to continue doing what they've been doing." He held her gaze. "The next thing he does will tell us exactly how exposed he is." Elena breathed. "He's going to try to access the account," she said, "when he realizes I've seen the transfers." "Yes," Paul said. "And when he can't, he'll try something else," Paul said, "and we'll be watching." Yak. Daniel's next move came faster than anyone expected. It was not a call. It was not a message. It was Elena's sister Camilla calling her at 4:47 p.m., with a voice that was tight with a specific kind of controlled alarm. "He called Marcus," Camilla said. Marcus was her husband. "He called Marcus directly. He told him you were in a mental health crisis, and that the people you were staying with were not appropriate support for someone in your condition. He said he was concerned you were being influenced by someone with financial motivations for keeping you isolated from your family." Elena closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she opened them. "He called Marcus," she said. "He had his number somehow," Camilla said. "I don't know how." Elena knew how. She had listed Camilla and Marcus as emergency contacts on a form 2 years ago. A form that had sat in a filing cabinet in the apartment she shared with Daniel. "What did Marcus say to him?" Elena asked. "Marcus told him that he had spoken to you this morning, and you sounded entirely clear-headed, and that if you wanted to reach out to family, you were perfectly capable of doing so yourself." A pause. "And then Marcus told him not to call again." "Okay," Elena said. "Elena." Camilla's voice dropped. "What is happening? Who is he calling us all? Why is he doing this?" "He's panicking," Elena said, and as she said it, she understood it was true. The Priya call. The Marcus call. The framing of her as unstable. "He's trying to build a story. He needs people around me who believe I'm not credible before I have a chance to tell them what I know." "What do you know?" Camilla asked. "More than he wants me to," she said. "I promise I'll explain everything soon. But right now I need you and Marcus to not engage with him. Don't respond. Don't be curious. Don't give him an opening." "Done," Camilla said. "Easy. Done." When Elena hung up, she found Adrian watching her from across the room. "He called my brother-in-law," she said. "I heard. He's building a case that I'm unstable," she said. "He's doing it fast, which means he knows he's running out of time. Something made him move faster than he planned." "The account," Adrian said. "He tried to access it an hour ago. Paul froze it at 3 p.m. Daniel hit the block and he knows someone has been ahead of him." He held her gaze. "He didn't think you would move this fast." "He didn't think I could," she said. "No," Adrian said. "He didn't." She felt something shift in her chest. Not satisfaction, not yet, but something close to clarity. The specific clarity of a person who has been operating in the fog of someone else's version of reality and has just stepped out of it into unobstructed air. "What's he going to do next?" she said. "He's going to look for leverage," Adrian said. "Something he has that you need. Something he can use as a reason for you to talk to him before the legal process advances any further." She thought about it. "The apartment," she said. "It's in both our names, but his name is listed first on the lease. He's going to claim I abandoned the residence." "Paul already filed a notification with the building management," Adrian said. "You are on record as a leaseholder in good standing who has been displaced due to safety concerns." She blinked. "You did that already." "Paul did it," he said, "while you were on the phone with Camilla." She stared at him. "You've been 2 steps ahead of him this entire time," she said. "Since this morning." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "I've been doing this for a long time," he said. "Not this specifically, but managing people who believe they're the only one in the room thinking carefully. They always make the same mistakes." A pause. They underestimate the person they've been underestimating, and they overestimate how much time they have. "He's going to realize soon that this isn't just me leaving," she said. "He's going to understand that this is legal, that it's documented, that it's more than a personal disagreement." "Yes," Adrian said. "And then he's going to come at it differently," she said. "He's going to come at you." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "He has information about your business," she said. "If he thinks using it protects him, then he'll try to use it," Adrian said. "And I'll be ready for that too." His voice was completely steady. "Elena, I want you to understand something." She looked at him. "I have been in complicated situations before," he said. "People have come at my business in various ways through various vectors. I know how to manage that." A pause. "But I also want to be clear with you that whatever happens on that side of things, whatever the consequences are for my business or my dealings, it does not change anything about what I'm doing here. For you, that is not contingent on the business situation. Do you understand what I'm saying?" She held his gaze. "You're saying this isn't transactional," she said. "I'm saying," he said carefully, "that you called me last night because you were frightened. Not because of anything else. Not because of business. Not because of Daniel and what he knows. You were frightened, and you needed help, and you trusted me enough to call." He paused. "That is the only reason I need." She looked at him for a long time. There was a particular kind of trust that had nothing to do with history or logic or the accumulation of evidence. It arrived all at once, like a light coming on in a room you had been navigating by memory, and you suddenly saw that everything you thought you knew the shape of was slightly different from how you'd imagined. "Daniel called you transactional," she said quietly. "Early on. When I told him who I worked for. He said men like you didn't keep people around unless they were useful. And what did you think?" She looked at him. "I thought he was probably right," she said, "at the time. And now—" She was quiet for a moment. "Now I think Daniel is very good at describing other people's flaws," she said, "in ways that are exactly tailored to what he wants you to believe about them." Adrian nodded once. Outside, the afternoon was going. The world kept its usual pace, indifferent to the fact that inside this room, a woman was slowly and methodically rebuilding her understanding of everything she had accepted as true for the last 2 years. And somewhere across the city, Daniel Cross had just discovered that the quiet, careful woman he had spent 2 years making smaller was not in fact small. He had picked up a phone. He had made calls. He had tried every lever he knew. None of them had moved. And in the pause that followed, the kind of silence that was not peace but recalculation, Daniel Cross made a decision that Elena had not predicted, that Adrian had not predicted, that changed the shape of everything that came after. He called the one person Elena had never mentioned, the one name that never appeared in any filing, any emergency contact form, any conversation with Priya or Camilla or anyone else in Elena's life. The name that Daniel should not have known at all. Her mother. Her mother's name was Rosa Marquez. She lived alone in a small house in Queens that smelled like coffee and the specific kind of soap that had been the smell of Elena's entire childhood. She was 63 years old, spoke English with a softness around the edges that had never fully smoothed out in 40 years of living in New York, and she had met Daniel Cross exactly 3 times. At a dinner Elena had arranged carefully at a birthday party that Daniel had suggested attending, and then spent most of being quietly charming to everyone in Rosa's orbit, and once unannounced when he had stopped by the house in Queens on a Tuesday afternoon while Elena was at work. Elena had not known about that last visit until Rosa mentioned it casually weeks later. Daniel had brought flowers. Rosa had made him coffee. He had stayed for nearly an hour. Elena had thought at the time that it was a kind gesture, that Daniel was making an effort with her family. She had filed it in the drawer of things that confirmed he was trying, that the relationship was worth maintaining, that the difficult parts were outweighed by the evidence of effort. She understood now what Tuesday afternoon in Queens had actually been. Reconnaissance. Her phone rang at 5:22 p.m., with her mother's name on the screen, and Elena felt something drop through the floor of her stomach. She answered on the first ring. "Mija." Rosa's voice was careful in the way it got careful when she was trying not to alarm someone. "I had a phone call today, from Daniel." "I know," Elena said. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have called you first. I should have—" "You have nothing to be sorry about." Her mother's voice sharpened slightly. "I need you to listen to me. He called me, and he told me you were having some kind of episode, that you had left in the middle of the night and gone somewhere with a man from your job, and that he was very worried about your mental state." A pause. "He used that word, episode." Elena closed her eyes. "He said I was having an episode. He did. And he spoke very calmly about it, which I think he thought would make me trust him more." Rosa's voice was quiet, but there was something under it, a heat restrained but present. "He does not know me very well." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I would pray for him," Rosa said. Despite everything, Elena felt something release in her chest, a laugh that was close to a sob. "Mom, I also told him that my daughter has been calling me every week since she was 16 years old, and that no man gets to tell me what her mental state is." A beat. "And then I told him I had to go, and I hung up." "Thank you," Elena said. Her voice was unsteady. "I'm so sorry he—" "Stop apologizing to me," Rosa said firmly. "Tell me where you are. Tell me you're safe." "I'm safe." Elena pressed her hand against her sternum. "I'm with my employer, Adrian Voss. I've worked for him for 5 years. You know I've mentioned him." "The powerful one," Rosa said. "Yes." "Is he good to you?" The simplicity of that question. The way it cut through everything else and landed on the only thing that mattered to a mother. "Yes," Elena said. "He is." Rosa was quiet for a moment. "Come see me," she said. "When you can. Whenever you're ready. But come." "I will," Elena said. "Soon. I promise." When she hung up, she turned around and found Adrian in the doorway. She did not say anything about the conversation. She did not need to. He had clearly heard enough from the way he was watching her. "He found my mother," she said. "I know." "He got her number from paperwork in the apartment. I had it listed." She pressed her lips together. "He introduced himself to her once when I wasn't there, months ago. I thought it was a kind gesture." Adrian said nothing, but his jaw did the thing it did. "He was building access points," she said, "to everyone around me, so that when the time came, he would already have a foot in every door." "Yes," Adrian said. "That's exactly what he was doing." She looked at him. "Why?" she said. "I keep coming back to that. Not just because of what he could get through me professionally. That can't be the whole reason. A person doesn't do all of this just for business advantage." Adrian came into the room fully and sat down across from her. "No," he said. "They don't." He was quiet for a moment, turning something over. "In my experience, people like Daniel operate from a specific core need. They need to be the person who controls the outcome. It's not just about money or information. It's about never being in a position where someone else holds the variable." He looked at her directly. "You were someone he couldn't fully predict. You were competent and independent and working in close proximity to a man with significant resources and influence. That combination was both useful to him and threatening to him at the same time. So he solved both problems at once," she said, "by making me smaller. By making you doubt yourself," he said. "Which is not the same thing. You were never actually smaller. You were just being convinced you were." She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "What did Paul find this afternoon?" You got a message during my call with my mother. I saw your face. Adrian looked at her. Carl Mercer, he said, has a business partner named Seth Grow. Seth Grow and Daniel Cross were college roommates. The room went very still. They know each other, she said. They've known each other for 15 years, Adrian said. The Chicago meeting, the subsequent property acquisitions, the shell companies. It wasn't opportunistic. It was a coordinated effort that predates your relationship with Daniel by at least 2 years. Elena did not move. He came for me specifically, she said. The words came out carefully, like she was testing the weight of each one. He found out who I worked for, and he came for me on purpose. That's what the evidence suggests, Adrian said. How did he find me? How did he even know to find me? That, Adrian said, is what we're still working out. But Paul has contacted a forensic investigator who specializes in corporate espionage. She's going to start pulling the thread tonight. Elena stood up. She did not know quite what to do with the energy that was moving through her. It was not panic. It was something harder and hotter than panic. It was the specific fury of a person who has understood fully and completely that they were a target. That the relationship they had tried to maintain and improve and make themselves worthy of had been from the beginning a mechanism. She had not been loved imperfectly. She had been used. I want to know everything, she said. Every piece of it. I want to see all the documentation. I want to understand the full picture. I know, Adrian said, and I want to be part of this. She looked at him. Not protected from it, not managed, part of it. Because this happened to me and I have information and context that no investigator is going to have. I know how Daniel thinks. I know his patterns. I know what he says when he's afraid, and what he does when he's calculating, and I know the difference between those two states. She held his gaze. Use that. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. Just like that. You're not asking me for something unreasonable, he said. You're asking to be treated as a capable person with relevant expertise. That's not a difficult request. She absorbed that. She had spent 2 years having every reasonable request reframed as an imposition. The directness of his response was in its own way almost more disorienting than the alternative. Okay, she said. Then tell me everything you know about Carl Mercer. Adrian told her. Mercer was a developer. Mid-tier operations that had been climbing steadily for a decade, primarily in commercial real estate, with a portfolio that looked clean on the surface, and had, when examined with the right tools, a series of acquisitions that lined up almost precisely with moments of weakness or distraction in the holdings of people Mercer was positioned near. He was not, Adrian said, a man who competed. He was a man who waited. He gathered information, identified pressure points, and moved when someone else was vulnerable. He tried to acquire the Harlow property after you were dealing with the Kellner situation 2 years ago, Elena said. Adrian looked at her. How did you know about the Kellner situation? Because I managed your calendar during it, she said. You were in 3 emergency meetings in 1 week, and your assistant before me, Sarah, who left the month after I arrived, filed the Harlow paperwork incorrectly, and you had me refile it urgently. I didn't know what Kellner was, but I knew it was creating a window of distraction, and I knew the Harlow filing was connected. She paused. Mercer made an offer on Harlow during that week. Yes, Adrian said slowly. Daniel asked me about the Kellner situation, she said. Not directly. He asked how work was going, whether there was anything stressful, whether I'd been busy with anything unusual. I said there was some urgency around a property filing, and I was covering for some disorganization in the transition between assistants. She felt sick. That's all I said. I didn't say names. You didn't need to, Adrian said. He would have had enough context to tell Mercer that there was a period of operational distraction. The rest, Mercer could have found through standard channels. She pressed her palms flat against the table. I gave him that, she said. I didn't know what I was giving him, but I gave him that. Elena, I know, she said. I know it's not my fault. I know I didn't understand what I was doing. But I also need to be honest about what happened, because the only way I can help fix this is if I stop protecting myself from the parts that are uncomfortable." Adrian was quiet. "That," he said after a moment, "is a very specific kind of courage." "It's not courage," she said. "It's just the only thing that makes sense to do." He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly conversational, and then he looked away. The forensic investigator's name was Diana Cho. She arrived at 7 p.m., carrying a laptop bag and the energy of someone who had been doing this long enough that nothing she was about to hear would surprise her, but everything she heard would be recorded with absolute precision. She shook Elena's hand and said, "Tell me about Daniel Cross, not the events. Tell me about him. How he thinks, what he prioritizes, where he gets nervous." Elena sat down across from her and talked for 40 minutes. She talked about the way Daniel handled confrontation. He never escalated immediately, always waited, always let the other person feel the silence first. She talked about how he managed information the specific way he would ask questions that seemed casual and were anything but. She talked about his relationship with control, that it was not emotional for him, or at least not primarily. It was structural. He needed to know how things would go before they went. He needed to have already determined the outcome before the situation began. "What makes him deviate from that pattern?" Diana asked. She was typing, but she was also watching Elena with the focused attention of someone who understood that the data in the room was not on the screen. "Exposure," Elena said immediately. "When he thinks he might be seen doing something he wants to hide, he moves sideways. He doesn't confront. He redirects. He creates an alternative story that gets told first. Like calling you unstable before you could tell your side." "Exactly like that." Diana nodded. "What does he do when the alternative story doesn't hold?" Elena thought about it. "He finds a pressure point," she said. "Something the other person values, something they're afraid to lose. And he applies pressure there not to win, but to slow things down, to buy time." "What pressure point does he have on you right now?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "He doesn't have one," she said. It was the first time she had said it out loud. "He's used all the ones he had. My friendships, I've already talked to Priya. My family, I've already talked to my mother and my sister. The apartment, it's been filed. The account's frozen." She paused. "He built his leverage on my silence and my isolation. The moment I started talking, he lost it." Diana looked at her steadily. "He knows that," she said. "Yes," Elena said. "So what does a man like Daniel Cross do when he realizes the pressure points are gone?" Elena met her eyes. "He stops being careful," she said. Diana sat back slightly. "That's right," she said. "And that's when he'll make the mistake we need." It came at 9:47 p.m. Not a call this time. Not a message to someone in Elena's circle. An email sent to a professional address that Daniel should not have had addressed to Adrian Voss directly. Adrian read it in the kitchen. Elena watched his face. He handed her the phone. The email was 7 paragraphs. It was written in the register of a reasonable man attempting to resolve a misunderstanding before it became unnecessarily complicated. It referenced in the 3rd paragraph information about the Kellner situation. It referenced in the 5th paragraph 3 names connected to Adrian's holdings that were not public knowledge. And in the 6th paragraph, it made a proposal. Daniel Cross would agree to a quiet separation from Elena and a clean dissolution of shared financial matters in exchange for Adrian Voss's withdrawal from any involvement in legal proceedings related to Cross's business activities. He was offering to leave Elena alone in exchange for being allowed to walk away from what he had done to Adrian's business. He was, in other words, confirming everything. Elena read it twice. Then she set the phone down. "He just put it in writing," she said. "Yes," Adrian said. "He's scared. Extremely. He doesn't know about Diana," she said. "He doesn't know about the forensic investigation. He thinks this is still a personal situation with a legal complication. He thinks the biggest threat to him is your involvement, not what we've already found." Which means he sent this before he understood the scope of what's been assembled, Adrian said. Which means he sent it at the worst possible moment from his perspective. Diana appeared from the other room. She had clearly read the email over Adrian's shoulder before he handed the phone to Elena. "I want to forward this to the federal contact I mentioned," she said to Adrian. "The industrial espionage component of this email combined with the Mercer-Grow documentation is enough to open a formal inquiry." "Do it," Adrian said. She nodded and disappeared back toward the other room. Elena was looking at the email again. There was a sentence in the fourth paragraph. She had almost passed over it, but something about it caught in her brain and would not let go. She read it again. Daniel had written, "I believe Elena herself would agree that a quiet resolution serves her interests better than a prolonged public proceeding, given what a formal investigation might reveal about her own knowledge and involvement." She read it a third time. He was threatening her. Even now, in an email that was functionally a confession, he had still found a way to insert a threat. The implication was clear. If she pushed forward, he would claim she was complicit. He would say she knew. He would say the line between what he had done and what she had allowed was thinner than she wanted anyone to believe. She set the phone on the counter. She looked at Adrian. "He just threatened to implicate me," she said. "I saw it. If I were the person I was 2 years ago," she said, "that sentence would have stopped me. I would have read that and I would have thought, what if he can make people believe that? What if it doesn't matter that I didn't know if he can construct a version where I did?" She breathed. "I would have called him. I would have tried to negotiate. I would have thought a quiet resolution was the safest thing." "And now," Adrian said, "now I know that's exactly what he wants," she said. "And I know that the threat only works if I'm still afraid of what people think of me." She met his eyes. "I'm not." She reached across the counter and picked up the phone and forwarded the email to Paul Reston with a single line. He just implicated himself. See paragraph 6. Paul responded in 4 minutes, already reading. "This is very good, Elena." She set the phone down. And then something happened that she had not planned and did not predict. Tears. Not the kind she had been holding back since the bathroom floor. Not grief or fear or shame. These were different. They came from somewhere lower and older and more fundamental. The specific release of a person who has been braced for impact for so long that when the impact finally turns out to be survivable, the body does not quite know what to do with the information. She did not try to stop them. Adrian did not say anything. He did not move toward her or away from her. He simply stayed exactly where he was present without intruding and let her have it. After a minute, she said, "I'm fine." "I know," he said. "I'm not sad," she said. "I don't know what this is." "It's the end of holding on," he said quietly. She looked at him. "When does it stop feeling like the ground is moving?" she said. "It varies," he said. "But it stops." She nodded. She pressed the back of her hand against her eyes. She breathed. "I need to go back to the apartment," she said. "At some point. There are things of mine that I need." "Not tonight," Adrian said. "I know not tonight. I mean, I need to not be afraid of going back. I need to be able to go there and take what's mine, and not feel like I'm doing something that requires permission." "That's not the same as going back," he said. "That's going forward." She looked at him again. He had a way of saying very simple things that landed differently than they should have, and she had been noticing it more over the last 24 hours than she had in 5 years of professional proximity, and she was not entirely sure what to do with that observation, except file it somewhere and examine it later when the ground was less mobile. "I talked to Diana," she said, steering back to steadier footing. "She asked me a question I've been thinking about since. She asked what Daniel does when the pressure points are gone. And you said he stops being careful." "Right. But I've been thinking about the specific way that happens. When Daniel stops being careful, he doesn't become reckless in an obvious way. He gets more specific. He narrows down to one target, and he goes hard at it." She paused. I think the target he's going to move to next is you directly, not the business, not through me. He's going to try to find something personal, something to use against you the way he used things against me." Adrian was quiet. "What makes you think that?" "Because that email was a proposal," she said. "And proposals only get sent when you've already identified what you're willing to trade. He offered me an exchange for your withdrawal, which means he's already done the calculation where you're the variable." She looked at him steadily. "He's going to look for something that makes you want to walk away from this." "He won't find it," Adrian said. "I know that," she said. "But he doesn't. So he'll look." She paused. "What does he have access to about you personally? Not the business. About you." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Nothing that isn't already documented," he said. "Everyone has something," she said gently. He looked at her. There was a long pause. The kind that has weight. "My brother," he said finally. She did not say anything. She waited. "Marcus Voss," he said. "He made some decisions 6 years ago that created a legal situation that was resolved privately. I spent a significant amount of time and resources ensuring that resolution remained private." He met her eyes. "If Daniel Cross finds the edge of that record, he'll pull on it." "Does Marcus know this might come up?" "Marcus lives in Seattle," Adrian said. "He has a family. He has a life that has been stable for 6 years because the situation was managed quietly." A pause. "No, he doesn't know." "Then you need to call him," Elena said. "Tonight, before Daniel finds the edge." Adrian looked at her. "You're telling me to call my brother," he said. "I'm telling you that the same strategy Daniel used on me, isolating someone from the people who love them to create vulnerability, that strategy only works if the isolation holds." She held his gaze. "Call your brother. Tell him what's happening. Take that lever away before Daniel finds it." The silence stretched. Adrian picked up his phone. He looked at it for a moment. "You spent 2 years learning the cost of staying quiet," he said, not accusing, observing. "I spent 2 years learning what it feels like to let someone else control the story," she said. "And then I spent 1 day learning what it feels like not to." He held her gaze for another moment. Then he called his brother. Elena gave him privacy for that call. She went to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her phone. She had 32 unread messages from Daniel's number now. She had stopped counting them earlier in the afternoon and they had kept coming. She opened one. It was from 2 hours ago. She could track the shift in register even in text. He had started the day in the concerned and reasonable mode. By mid-afternoon, he had moved to something more plaintive, more personal, more designed to make her feel guilty. But this one, 2 hours ago, had a different texture. "Elena, I know you think you understand what's happening, but you don't have the full picture. There are things about the situation that you're not aware of. I need you to call me before this goes any further. I am trying to protect you. That is still what I am doing. Call me." She read it twice. "I am trying to protect you." That sentence, the audacity of it. After the drained account and the manipulated friendships and the Tuesday afternoon in her mother's kitchen and the forensic timeline that stretched back 14 months of systematic theft. After all of it, he was still reaching for the frame of protection. Still trying to make himself the person standing between her and something worse. She typed a reply for the first time. She typed, "I have the full picture now." She deleted it. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. She did not send anything. She did not need to. Everything that needed to be said was already in the hands of people who knew how to use it. She lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling and tried to take inventory of who she was right now at this specific moment, 41 hours after the bathroom floor. She was injured in a small way that would heal. She was frightened in a way that was also healing faster than she expected. She was angry in a way that felt clean and purposeful rather than corrosive. She realized more herself than she had been in 2 years. The version of her that existed in this room in this hour, making deliberate choices about who to call and what to say, and when to stay quiet. This was closer to the person she had been before Daniel, and further from the diminished reflection he had spent 2 years constructing. That more than anything was the thing she wanted to hold on to. She heard Adrian finish his call. She heard him stand in the hallway outside the guest room for a moment, and then she heard him walk away toward the kitchen, and she heard the low sound of him refilling something, and the specific quiet of a man who had just done something hard and was letting himself be still for a moment. She understood that quiet. She lay there, and she listened to it, and she thought about the particular shape of the situation she was in. 2 people, each of them accustomed to handling things alone, each of them now in a position where handling things alone was no longer an option. Not because they weren't capable. Because the person who had come at both of them had come at them together, had used the connection between them as a vector, and the only coherent response to that was to treat the connection as a strength rather than a liability. She got up and went to the kitchen. Adrian was standing with his back to the doorway, looking at nothing. "How is he?" she said. He turned. "Angry," he said. "And relieved. Both at the same time." He was quiet for a moment. He said he always suspected there would be something like this eventually. That the way things were resolved 6 years ago quietly without full accountability left a door open somewhere. "Is he going to be okay?" "Yes," Adrian said. He said. He stopped. A short pause. He said thank you for warning him. He looked at her. "I told him it wasn't my idea." She looked at him. "It was the right call," she said. "I know," he said. "I know that." He set down his glass. "I don't make calls like that, in general. I manage exposure by keeping the circle small and the information controlled. That's been my method for a long time." A pause. "You told me that Daniel's method was the same thing from the other side. Keep people isolated so they can't protect each other." "It's the same mechanism," she said. "Different intentions, different scale. But the same underlying move." "I noticed that," he said quietly. She looked at him for a moment. "Adrian," she said, "what Paul found today, what Diana is building tonight, what Daniel just confirmed in that email, this is going to come out. The full story, about what he did to your business and what he did to me. When it does, people are going to know that your executive assistant was the access point." "That's not how I see it," he said. "It's how some people will see it. Some people," he said, "are not my concern." "Your business is your concern," she said. "Your reputation is your concern. My concern," he said quietly, "is that a person I have worked beside for 5 years, and whom I've apparently not paid enough attention to, was being systematically targeted in part because of her proximity to me, and I didn't see it in time to do anything about it." His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. "That is my concern, not what people decide to make of it afterward." She looked at him. There was a particular feeling she had no ready vocabulary for. The specific experience of being seen, not managed, not assessed, not weighed against a calculation of usefulness, but simply seen. It was new enough that she did not quite know where to put it. "I'm going to be okay," she said. "I know," he said. "I mean, I don't need you to keep—" "I know what you mean," he said. "And I know you don't need me to. That's not the same as me not wanting to." She held very still. He looked at her for a moment that lasted exactly long enough. Then Diana came back into the room with her laptop and said, "We need to look at something." And the moment rearranged itself back into the shape of the situation they were in, and they both turned toward her. Diana set the laptop on the counter and turned it so they could both see the screen. "The forensic accountant finished the first pass on the transaction history," she said. "I need you both to look at this." Elena leaned in. The numbers on the screen were not what she expected. She had known the withdrawals from the household account were significant. She had heard the number Paul told her that afternoon, and she had absorbed it without fully absorbing it the way you absorb a number that is too large to feel real. But what Diana was showing her now was not the household account. It was a second account. One that had Elena's name on it. One she had never opened, never signed for, never seen before in her life. One that had been receiving deposits for 22 months. "He opened an account in my name," she said. "Using your information," Diana said. "Identity documents, social security number, all of it from paperwork in the apartment." "What's in it?" Elena said. Diana told her. Elena straightened up slowly. She turned and looked at Adrian. "He wasn't just stealing from me," she said. "He was building a fund, in my name, with money that moved through companies connected to Mercer." She could hear her own voice, very even from somewhere slightly outside herself. "If any of this had come to light without the context we have now, it would have looked like I was the one laundering it." The kitchen was very quiet. "That was the backup plan," Adrian said. "That was always the backup plan," Elena said. "If the quiet arrangement fell apart, if I left him, or if I started asking questions, or if anyone started looking at the Mercer connection, there was an account in my name with enough in it to redirect the entire investigation." She had known on some level that this was going to be bad. She had known from the moment she understood that Daniel had come for her on purpose that the depth of the plan would be worse than anything visible from the surface. But this was a different kind of bad. This was not just control. This was not just theft. This was a contingency plan designed to destroy her if he needed an exit. She had been a resource and a shield at the same time, and he had been holding that shield in reserve for over 20 months. She breathed. She breathed again. "Okay," she said. Diana looked at her carefully. "This is actually better for us," Diana said. Not gently, factually, which Elena found she preferred. "Because this turns what looked like a domestic and financial abuse case into a federal conspiracy with a documented paper trail that leads directly from Daniel Cross through Seth Groh to Carl Mercer. The account in your name is evidence of premeditation. It makes the entire operation visible in a way that individual transactions wouldn't." "How long before a formal investigation is opened?" Adrian asked. "The contact I called this afternoon said they've been looking at Mercer's network for 2 years. Diana said. "This is the thread they've been missing. It moves quickly from here." Adrian nodded. Elena was still looking at the screen. The account number, the balance, the name across the top. Her name, her social security number. 2 years of someone else's plan built on the bones of her identity. She thought about the woman on the bathroom floor last night, holding her phone and talking herself out of asking for help. She thought about every version of the conversation where she called Daniel back and tried to negotiate, where she read his email and thought a quiet resolution was the safest thing, where she let the threat in the 4th paragraph stop her the way it was designed to stop her. She thought about all the ways this could have gone if she had been a little more tired, or a little more afraid, or a little more willing to choose the path of least resistance. She was not grateful for any of it, but she was clear. "Diana," she said, "what do you need from me tonight?" Diana looked at her, and then very briefly at Adrian. "Your complete timeline," she said. "Every conversation you can remember where Daniel asked about your work. Dates if you have them, context if you don't. Everything." "How long will that take?" "As long as it takes," Diana said. "Are you ready?" Elena looked at the screen one more time. Then she looked away from it. "Yes," she said. "Let's go." The timeline took 3 hours and 40 minutes. Elena sat at the kitchen counter with Diana across from her and a recorder running between them, and she talked. She went back 2 years and 9 months to the first dinner she had with Daniel, and she moved forward through every conversation she could remember where the subject had shifted subtly and always casually toward her work. She named dates when she had them. She named contexts when she didn't. She described the specific quality of Daniel's questions, how they never felt like interrogation, how they arrived wrapped in interest and warmth, how he had a way of making her feel that sharing was intimacy rather than disclosure. Adrian stayed in the room for the first hour. Then he moved to his office down the hall, and she could hear him on the phone, low and continuous, the sound of a man managing several things at once. She found it steadying rather than distracting. The knowledge that work was happening on multiple fronts simultaneously, that this was not a single thread being pulled, but an entire net being drawn in. At some point past midnight, Diana closed her laptop. "That's enough for tonight," she said. "What you've given me fills in at least 14 months of gaps in the Mercer timeline. The federal contact is going to want to talk to you directly probably within the next 48 hours. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes," Elena said. "It won't be comfortable," Diana said. "They'll ask questions that assume your involvement. Standard procedure. They have to establish what you knew and when." "I know," Elena said. "I'm not afraid of those questions." Diana looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who had seen a great many people in this specific position and was making a private assessment. "You should sleep," Diana said. "Tomorrow is going to move fast." She packed her laptop and let herself out. Elena sat in the quiet of the kitchen and listened to Adrian finish his call, and then there was silence from the hallway, and then he appeared in the doorway. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. "Diana said the federal contact wants to talk to me within 48 hours. He nodded. He looked tired, not collapsed, not undone, but the specific tiredness of a person who had been operating at full capacity for an extended period without rest. She recognized it because she was wearing the same thing. "You should sleep," she said, echoing Diana without meaning to. "You first," he said. "That's not how it works. It's how it works tonight," he said. He poured a glass of water and set it in front of her. "Drink that, then sleep." She drank the water. She did not argue. Some negotiations she had learned were not worth the energy they required, and there were certain things Adrian Voss said that had the quality of a wall, not aggressive, not controlling, just completely solid in a way that made pushing against them feel beside the point. She went to the guest room. She did not expect to sleep. She was out within 8 minutes. She woke at 6:14 a.m. to the sound of her phone vibrating. Not Daniel. She saw that first. Priya. She answered immediately. "He came to the office," Priya said. Her voice was tight and very controlled. The voice of someone who had been holding something difficult and was now handing it over as carefully as she could manage. "Last night, after hours. Security let him in because his name was on Elena Marquez's visitor registration from 8 months ago and it hadn't been updated." Elena sat up. "What did he do?" "He went to your desk," Priya said. "I wasn't there. This is from the security log that Marcus in building management just showed me. He was there for about 20 minutes. He accessed your desk drawer. He left with something. Marcus couldn't see exactly what from the camera angle, but he had something in his hand when he came in, and something different when he left." "He took something from my desk," Elena said. "Or he left something," Priya said. "Marcus wasn't sure of the direction." Elena was already out of bed. She could hear the shift in her own voice, the specific sharpening that happened when something clarified suddenly, when the shape of a move became visible. "Priya, I need you to not touch my desk. Don't touch anything in or around it. Can you do that?" "Already done," Priya said. "I put a note on the chair. I said it was reserved for maintenance." "Good. I'm going to make some calls. Don't go in early today." She hung up and went directly to Adrian's door and knocked twice. The door opened in 4 seconds, which told her he had not been deeply asleep either. She told him what Priya said. He was on his phone before she finished the second sentence. Paul Reston arrived at the office building at 8:30 a.m. with a colleague who specialized in evidence preservation, and a letter from a judge that had been obtained at some point in the previous 12 hours, which Elena did not ask about and Adrian did not explain. She stood in the lobby while they went up. She was not permitted to go with them. Her desk was now potentially a crime scene, and her presence would complicate the chain of custody. And she stood in the lobby with her arms crossed and her jaw set and felt the specific frustration of being the most relevant person in a situation, and the one person who had to stand still. Adrian stood beside her. He did not say anything. He did not try to fill the silence or manage her experience of it. He simply stood there with her the way he had been standing there for 2 days now, present without performance. Which was, she had decided, one of the most underrated qualities a person could have. If he planted something, she said, it means he's already planning the pivot. Yes, Adrian said. He's going to claim I was complicit. He's going to say whatever he left at my desk proves I was part of it. She breathed. He's executing the backup plan. He's panicking, Adrian said. There's a difference. Executing a backup plan requires calm and timing. He went to your office after hours because he ran out of moves. That's not execution. That's improvisation. Improvisation can still do damage, she said. It can, he agreed. But it leaves traces that deliberate planning doesn't. He went in on a visitor pass that should have been expired. He went to a specific desk in a specific office, which tells us he knew where you sat, which is information that came from somewhere. He was on camera. He did this in a building with a documented security log. He paused. A man operating from a solid plan does not leave those traces. She thought about that. He's fracturing, she said. Yes, good, she said, and she meant it without apology. Paul called at 9:17 a.m. We found it, he said. Desk drawer under the false bottom on the right side. It's a USB drive. A pause. We are not going to access it directly. It goes to the forensic team first. But based on the location and the deliberateness of the placement, I'd say he either put something on it he wants attributed to you, or he retrieved something from it that he thought he needed before we got there. Can you tell which? Elena asked. Not yet, Paul said. But we'll know within a few hours. She lowered the phone. She told Adrian what Paul said. He nodded once, the specific nod of a man confirming something he already suspected. The question, she said, is how long ago he planted access to my desk. If the false bottom in that drawer was his work, he had access to my physical workspace at some point in the last 2 years, which means he may have had access to physical documents as well, Adrian said. They looked at each other. I need to think about what was in that desk, she said. Over the years, what I kept there. Think carefully, he said. Take your time. She thought carefully. She took her time. 14 minutes later, she said, there was a folder, physical copies of meeting summaries from the Kellner period. I kept them because the filing system was disrupted during the assistant transition, and I wanted paper backups in case the digital records were incomplete. I should have filed them properly when the situation resolved. I didn't. They stayed in the drawer. She looked at him. If he photographed those documents at any point, he had the full context of the Kellner situation. Not just the timing. The substance. Adrian was completely still. That's what he gave Mercer, he said. That's what he gave Mercer, she confirmed. The silence between them had weight. Adrian, she said. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't... Stop, he said. Quiet. Definitive. The documents were there because you were doing your job carefully during a difficult operational period. You kept paper backups because the system was compromised. That is not a mistake. That is good judgment that was exploited by someone who had intimate access to your life. He met her eyes. I will not accept your apology for that. She held his gaze. She was not going to cry again. She had made that decision when she woke up this morning, and she was committed to it. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. His phone rang. He answered it, listened for 20 seconds, and said, I'll be right up. He looked at her. Paul needs me in the building for something. Will you be all right down here? I'm fine, she said. Go. He went. She stood in the lobby alone for the first time in 40 hours and took inventory of herself. She was exhausted in a way that had moved past the point where rest fully addressed it. She was angry in a way that was steady and functional rather than overwhelming. And she was underneath all of it in a state that she was only just beginning to identify correctly. She was not afraid. That was new. That was actually remarkable. She had been afraid for so long, not always visibly, not always consciously, But that low, constant hum of wariness that had shaped every decision, softened every sentence, made her smaller in every room. And it was not there right now. In its place was something quieter and more solid. Not confidence exactly. Not certainty. More like the specific sensation of a person who has decided to trust the ground under her own feet. She thought about her mother saying, "Is he good to you?" She thought about the simplicity of that question and how much was contained in it. She thought about Adrian standing in the lobby beside her, saying nothing, just being there, and the way that nothing had felt like more than most people's everything. She was going to have to examine that at some point, not today. Today had a shape already, and there was no room in it for anything that didn't directly address the situation at hand. But at some point, when the ground finished settling, she was going to have to look honestly at the thing that had been growing quietly in the space between 5 years of professional distance and 2 days of something else entirely. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She had a policy now, a new one implemented approximately 36 hours ago, about unknown numbers and the assumption of good faith. She answered anyway. Elena Marquez, a woman's voice, professional, crisp. Yes. My name is Special Agent Renata Flores. I'm with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I was told to expect your call, but I wanted to reach out directly. Is this a good time? Elena straightened. Yes, she said. It's a good time. Agent Flores asked different questions than Diana had asked. Diana had wanted Daniel. Flores wanted the system. She was not interested in the emotional arc of the relationship or the specific texture of Daniel's control. She was interested in dates, transfers, documentation, the precise sequence of events that connected Daniel Cross to Seth Groh, to Carl Mercer, to a series of acquisitions that had Agent Flores told her, in the careful language of federal procedure, been under investigation for 14 months. 14 months, Elena said. Correct, Flores said. We have been building this case from the Mercer end. What we did not have was the connective tissue, the mechanism by which information was being obtained and transmitted. Your situation provides that. My situation, Elena said. I want to be clear about something, Flores said. Nothing in what I've reviewed suggests your knowing involvement in any part of this. The account opened in your name is a documented identity theft. The pattern of information transfer is consistent with you being a source who was not aware she was being used as a source. A pause. But I need you to understand that the formal interview process will not begin from that position. It will begin from a neutral position and establish it through the interview itself. Diana told me, Elena said. I understand. Good, Flores said. Can you come in tomorrow at 10? Yes, she said. She had not asked Adrian if that was possible. She had not checked any schedule. She had simply said yes because the answer was yes, and she was done asking permission for things that were hers to decide. She went upstairs. The office felt different with a forensic team in it. She stood in the doorway of the open-plan floor and looked at her desk, which had 2 people in gloves working around it, with the focused efficiency of people who treated physical space as a kind of text to be read. And she felt something complicated move through her. This was her workspace. She had spent 5 years here. She knew every surface and drawer, and the specific way the afternoon light moved across the far wall, and the angle at which you had to hold your badge for the scanner to read it on the first try. Daniel had been in this room. He had stood at her desk and opened her drawer, and understood at some point in the last 2 years that the careful professional woman who occupied this space had no idea she was already inside someone else's plan. She looked away from the desk. Paul was standing near the window with Adrian. She crossed to them. The drive, Paul said when she reached them. It's a plant, not a retrieval. He put something on it. Our forensic team is analyzing the contents now, but the metadata shows the files were created within the last 72 hours. What kind of files? She asked. Communications, Paul said. purportedly between you and a third party, discussing the movement of information about Voss Holdings. He kept his voice neutral and factual. They are fabrications. The metadata is inconsistent with how your email client generates headers, the timestamps don't align with periods when you were documented elsewhere, and the language patterns are measurably different from your actual correspondence. He paused. But they are professionally done. If we had found them without the context we have, they would have created significant problems. Elena processed that. He made fake emails, she said. In my name. Between me and someone in Mercer's network. Yes. And if this had come to light the way he intended, if I had stayed, if I had tried to negotiate quietly, if none of this had been assembled, then at some point, under circumstances he controlled, those files would have become visible, Paul said. And the account in your name and the documents in your desk and the communications on this drive would have painted a picture of an employee who had been selling information about her employer for nearly 2 years. The room was very quiet. She turned to Adrian. He was watching her with an expression that had moved past the careful neutrality he maintained most of the time into something more direct, something she had not seen before. He was going to destroy you, Adrian said. His voice was low and very even. Completely, professionally and legally, while positioning himself as someone who had tried to help you. That was always the exit strategy, she said, if everything else fell apart. Yes. He must have started building it the moment I called you, she said. Or maybe before, maybe the moment he understood that the financial situation was going to become visible. She thought about the timeline. He moved fast. He did, Adrian said. Which tells us something. That he was scared, she said. That he's been scared for a while, he said. This level of preparation, the account, the documents, the drive, this is not something you build in 48 hours. This has been sitting in reserve. He was always ready to burn you if he needed to. She looked at her desk again, at the two people in gloves reading her physical space like text. I want to sit in on the federal interview, Adrian said. She turned. It's my interview, she said. I know, he said. I'm not asking to speak for you. I'm asking to be in the room. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what that meant and what it didn't mean and the difference between those two things. All right, she said. But if you speak for me, I won't, he said. If you try to manage it, I won't do that either. She held his gaze. Okay, she said. The afternoon brought Daniel's lawyer. She had expected this and had not expected it to happen so fast. The lawyer's name was Gerald Fitch, and he was the kind of attorney who wore his competence like a second suit, expensive, fitted, designed to communicate authority before a word was spoken. He called Paul at 2:17 p.m. Elena was in the room when Paul took the call, and she watched Paul's face, and she could read the shape of the conversation, even without hearing the other side. When Paul hung up, he sat back and looked at her. Gerald Fitch is offering a settlement, he said. On behalf of Daniel Cross, complete dissolution of the shared financial arrangements, return of all transferred funds, a signed statement that Daniel acknowledges responsibility for the financial misconduct. He paused. In exchange for Elena's withdrawal from any federal proceeding and a mutual non-disclosure agreement. The room was very quiet. Elena looked at Paul. He's offering to give back the money, she said. And acknowledge the abuse, Paul said. In writing. In exchange for my silence. Effectively, yes. She looked at Adrian, who was standing to her left. He said nothing. His face said nothing. He was doing exactly what he had said he would do, being in the room without managing the outcome. She looked back at Paul. What about the federal investigation? She said. The NDA could not prevent your cooperation with a federal investigation already underway, Paul said. But it would significantly complicate your position as a witness. Fitch is aware of that. So Daniel knows about the investigation, she said. He knows something is coming, Paul said. He may not know the full scope. She thought about the drive, about the fake emails, about the account in her name. About 22 months of a contingency plan held in reserve for exactly this moment. She thought about what it would mean to take the money and the acknowledgement and the signed statement and walk away. She thought about whether that was what she wanted. She sat with the question honestly because it deserved honesty. She was tired. She was bruised in ways that were not visible. The idea of a clean exit money returned acknowledgement on paper, the whole thing placed in a drawer and closed, had a real appeal, and she was not going to pretend it didn't. But she thought about Mercer, about the shell companies, about the acquisitions made using information extracted from her without her knowledge, about the other people in that network, the people downstream of Daniel and Grow and Mercer who were being harmed by a system that had been running for years and would keep running if nobody pulled the thread far enough. She thought about Agent Flores saying, "What we did not have was the connective tissue." She was the connective tissue. If she signed the NDA, the connective tissue disappeared. "No," she said. Paul nodded, just once. "I'll let Fitch know," he said. "Tell him." She said that if Daniel wants to make something right, he can cooperate fully with the federal investigation. She paused. "Tell him that's the only settlement I'm interested in." Paul almost smiled. It was very small and very controlled, but it was there. He made the call. Fitch called back 11 minutes later. Paul listened. He said 3 words during the call. He hung up. "Daniel is requesting a direct meeting," Paul said. "With you, no lawyers. He says he has something he wants to tell you that he will not put through legal channels." Elena looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at her. "No," he said. "Not controlling, not managing. Just one word, direct and clear." "That's what I think too," she said. She looked at Paul. "Tell Fitch that any communication Daniel wants to make goes through counsel. There is no direct meeting." Paul relayed that. This time, Fitch called back in 4 minutes. "Daniel says." Paul said carefully, looking at Elena, that there is a third account. Not the household account and not the one in your name. A third account that holds assets Elena may not be aware of. He says he will only disclose the details in a face-to-face meeting. Elena was very still. "He's invented a third account," she said. "Possibly," Paul said. "Or he's telling the truth," Adrian said quietly. "And if he is, the question is what's in it and why he wants to disclose it in person rather than through counsel." She thought about that. A third account. Face-to-face. No lawyers. It was a move. Everything Daniel did was a move. But the question was whether the move was designed to get her alone to manipulate her to reintroduce himself into her decision-making process in a context where he could work with the variables, or whether there was something real and he was reaching for the only leverage he had left. "He wants to see my face when he tells me," she said. Not to Paul, to Adrian. "Yes," Adrian said. "He wants to know how it lands," she said. "Whatever it is. He wants to be able to read me and adjust. That's why no lawyers." "Yes," Adrian said again. "So the question is whether whatever he's sitting on is real enough that the risk of giving him that meeting is worth what we might get from it." She looked at Paul. "Can Agent Flores tell us if there's any record of a third account?" she asked. "I can ask," Paul said. "It'll take a few hours." "Ask," she said. "And tell Fitch we'll respond by this evening." Agent Flores called back at 4:45. "There are records consistent with a third account," she said. "We've identified a holding structure that Grow and Mercer use for assets that are in transition between acquisition and formal placement. It's designed to be temporary and untraceable. If Cross has deposited anything in your name into that structure, it would be significantly more than the other account." "How much more?" Elena asked. Flores told her. Elena sat down. The number was large enough that it changed the shape of what she thought she understood. She had known Daniel was extracting money. She had known there was a fund in her name built with Mercer-connected deposits. But this number meant the operation had been significantly more successful than she had understood, which meant Daniel had been significantly more successful than anyone had understood, which meant he had more to lose than he had shown. If he cooperates, Elena said. If Daniel voluntarily discloses that structure and the assets in it, what does that do for the federal case? It accelerates it significantly, Flores said. Grow and Mercer have insulated themselves very carefully. Cross is the link between their structure and the information pipeline. His voluntary disclosure with documentation cuts through a great deal of what we've been working around. Elena sat with that for a moment. He's not offering to cooperate because he's changed, she said. He's offering because he's calculated that cooperation gets him a better outcome than resistance. Almost certainly, Flores said. But the outcome for the case is the same either way. Yes, Flores said. The information is what we need. The motive for providing it is secondary. Elena looked at Adrian, who had been sitting across from her while she took the call. If I go to this meeting, she said to him after she had ended the call with Flores, it's not because he asked. It's not because I owe him an explanation or a hearing or a chance to make me feel something. She held his gaze. It's because what he knows can end something that hurt a lot of people beyond just me. And if sitting across a table from Daniel Cross for 30 minutes accomplishes that, I can do it. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. You don't have to, he said. I know that, she said. That's why I'm choosing to. He was quiet. I'll be there, he said. You can't be in the room, she said. I'll be in the building, he said. In the room next to it. She thought about arguing. She thought about the principle of the thing, about doing this on her own terms, without the visible support of someone else, about proving to herself and to Daniel and to whoever was watching that she did not need a wall behind her. Then she thought about what Daniel would see walking into that meeting if he knew Adrian Voss was in the building. All right, she said. In the building. In the room next to it, he said. In the building, she said. A beat. In the building, he agreed. The meeting was set for the following morning at 10 a.m. at Paul's office. Elena spent the evening doing 3 things. She called her mother and talked for an hour, real conversation, the kind that had been constricted for 2 years by the habit of managing Daniel's reaction to everything. She called Camilla and Marcus and listened to Camilla describe the conversation she'd had with her neighbor about the situation, which had the warming quality of watching someone who loves you be angry on your behalf. And she sat alone in the guest room for 40 minutes and thought about what she was going to say. Not to win, not to get a reaction, not to make Daniel feel anything in particular, just to be clear, to herself if nothing else, about who she was walking into that room as. She was not the woman who had called him from a bathroom floor. She was not the person who had spent 2 years making herself smaller to fit inside his idea of who she should be. She was not frightened, and she was not uncertain, and she was not going to perform either of those things for him. She was Elena Marquez. She had been an executive assistant for 5 years in a high-pressure environment, and she was good at her job, and she had been a resource to a plan that had nothing to do with her, and she had dismantled that plan in 72 hours with a lawyer and an investigator and a federal agent and a man who had stood beside her through all of it, without once asking her to be less than what she was. She was going to walk into a room with the person who had systematically tried to erase her, and she was going to be entirely, specifically, precisely herself. That she decided was already the victory. The rest was paperwork. At 9 a.m. the next morning, standing in Paul's lobby, while Adrian sat in the waiting area with his coffee and his newspaper and his absolute unhurried presence, Elena's phone buzzed with a message from a number she recognized. Daniel. She opened it. It was 4 words. I'm already inside. She stared at the message. Then she looked up and found Adrian watching her from across the lobby. She held the phone so he could read the screen from where he sat. He read it. He set down his coffee. He said, "Are you ready?" She put the phone in her pocket. "Yes," she said. She walked to the elevator, The doors opened. She stepped in. And for the first time in 3 days, she thought about the moment in the bathroom when she had almost talked herself out of making the call, when the fear had been stronger than the need, when the shame of asking for help had almost won over the knowledge that staying was destroying her. She thought about how close it had been. She thought about what the last 72 hours had cost her and what they had given her and what she was walking toward now, not because someone had told her she was ready, not because the fear was gone, not because the ground was solid, but because she had decided to walk anyway. The elevator opened. She stepped out. She walked down the hall. She put her hand on the door. She opened it. Daniel Cross was already seated when she walked in. That was deliberate. She understood it immediately. The choice to arrive first, to be settled and composed when she entered, to hold the psychological advantage of the person who had been waiting rather than the person who walked in. It was the same move he had been making for 2 years. Position yourself as the stable one. Let her be the variable. She sat down across from him without speaking. She looked at him directly. He looked different than she expected, and then she corrected herself. He looked exactly the same, and she was the one who was different. And that was why he seemed changed. The same controlled posture, the same careful expression, the same quality of stillness that she had once interpreted as strength and now recognized as performance. He was wearing the face he wore when he needed something. She had seen it many times. She had simply not known for most of those times what he was performing it for. "Elena," he said. His voice was warm, measured, exactly calibrated. "Thank you for coming." "You said you had information," she said. "I'm here for the information." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. The warmth did not disappear. He was too practiced for that, but it recalibrated. He had expected something different from her, a residue of the old dynamic, some remnant of the woman who softened her voice in his presence and chose her words based on his likely reaction. She was not performing that woman today. "I want to start by saying," he began, "Daniel." She kept her voice completely even. "I didn't come here for an apology. I came here because you told Paul's office you have information about a third account. If you have that information, share it. If you don't, I'm going to stand up and walk out, and the federal investigation proceeds without your cooperation." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him recalculate. "You've changed," he said. "Tell me about the account," she said. He looked at her for another moment. She could see him working through options the way she had always been able to see his mind moving if she looked carefully enough, and she had been looking carefully enough for the last 4 days. Then he did something she did not expect. He reached into the folder in front of him and slid a document across the table. She looked at it without touching it. It was a bank statement, an account she had never seen. Her name was not on it, and neither was his. The name on the account was a holding company with a generic corporate designation that meant nothing on its own. "Meridian Holdings," she said. "A shell," he said. "One of Mercer's. But this one is different from the others. This one has a designated beneficiary." He paused. "You." She looked at the document more carefully. Her name, in the beneficiary field, listed there not as an account holder, but as the designated recipient of assets in the event of specific triggering conditions. "He made me the beneficiary of a shell company," she said flatly. "Seth Grove's idea," Daniel said. His voice had shifted. The warmth was gone now, replaced by something more stripped down, something that she thought might be closer to the truth of him than anything she had heard in 2 years. The logic was that if the entire structure ever became visible, the assets flowing to your name would be evidence of your involvement. Another layer of insurance. "Against me," she said. "Against anyone who might disrupt the arrangement," he said. She looked at him. "And what was your role in that decision?" He met her eyes. He did not look away. She gave him credit for that, small and qualified as it was. "I agreed to it," he said. The room was very still. You agreed to structure an asset specifically to destroy me if the operation was ever exposed, she said. Yes, he said. She breathed. She had known this was what the meeting would contain. She had prepared for it. She had sat in the guest room the night before and walked through every version of what Daniel might say and how she would respond, and she had arrived at a place of steady cold clarity that she had worn into this room like a coat. And yet hearing him say yes, hearing the simple confirmation of it from his own mouth, landed differently than she expected. Not because it was surprising, because it was so complete. Because it was the final piece of a picture she had been assembling for 4 days, and now that the last piece was in place, she could see the whole thing. She had been selected, approached, cultivated, loved in whatever diminished and instrumental way Daniel was capable of love as a means to an end that had nothing to do with her. She had been positioned beside a man with significant resources and then systematically hollowed out so that she could be worn as cover or deployed as sacrifice, depending on which situation arose. And she had spent 2 years telling herself the difficult parts were her fault. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Daniel looked at his hands. "Because Mercer is going to let me go down for all of it," he said. "That's what I didn't understand until last week. The entire structure, the accounts, the shell companies, the beneficiary designations, it was built so that when it collapsed onto the people closest to the information pipeline, me and you." He looked up. "I thought I was a partner. I was a cutout." She sat with that. "You built the trap for me," she said, "and discovered you were standing in it too." He did not answer, but his face answered. "And now, you want to cooperate with the federal investigation," she said. "Because cooperation gives you the best outcome available, and the information you have about Mercer's structure is the only currency you have left." "Yes," he said, simply. "So everything you're telling me right now—" She leaned forward slightly. "None of it is about me. None of it is about what you did. It's about the fact that you're cornered, and you need the federal case to go in a specific direction to limit your own exposure." He did not deny it. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Then let me tell you something." He looked at her. "I came into this room ready to hear what you had to say, because Agent Flores told me your cooperation could accelerate the investigation and close down a system that has been operating for years and has hurt people who were not me and had nothing to do with your arrangement with Mercer." She kept her voice level. "That's the only reason I'm sitting here. Not because you asked. Not because I owe you anything. Not because some part of me still needed to hear you say you agreed to destroy me. Although I will tell you that hearing you say it out loud just now is something I will spend a long time with." Daniel's jaw moved. "Elena." "I'm not finished," she said. He stopped. "What you did to me was not a business decision that happened to involve a personal relationship," she said. "You came for me specifically. You spent 2 years making me smaller and more uncertain and more isolated because a frightened woman with eroding confidence was easier to position and easier to burn than the actual person I was when you met me." She paused. "And I want you to know that the thing you were most afraid of, the version of me that was too functional and too clear-eyed to be useful to you, she's the one sitting across from you right now." The silence was absolute. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. She could see something moving behind his eyes that she had never seen there before. Not guilt exactly. Something more mechanical than guilt. The specific expression of a man who has made a calculation and is watching the answer come out wrong. "You should cooperate with the investigation," she said. "Not for me, for yourself, because it's the only move you have left. Give them Mercer and Grow and the full structure. Give them everything. And then live with it." She stood up. She picked up Paul's copy of the Meridian Holdings document from the table. "My attorney will be in touch with yours about the cooperation agreement," she said. She walked to the door. "Elena." His voice came from behind her. She stopped but did not turn. "I want you to know that it wasn't only—" He stopped, started again. "It wasn't all strategy, At the beginning. I want you to know that. She stood very still for a moment. She thought about what to do with that sentence, whether it deserved a response, whether it changed anything, whether the thing it was asking her to do, to hold space for the possibility that some fraction of what they had was real, was something she could give him. She turned around. She looked at him one more time. I know, she said. That's actually the saddest part of all of it. She opened the door. She walked out. Gamichan. Adrian was in the hallway. Not in the building, not in the waiting room, in the hallway directly outside the conference room door. Standing with his coffee abandoned somewhere, hands in his pockets, watching the door she had just come through. She looked at him. You were supposed to be in the building, she said. I am in the building, he said. Adrian. How are you, he said. She thought about the question honestly. She stopped. She tried again. I told him the thing I needed to say, and he confirmed everything. And he's going to cooperate with Flores because he doesn't have another option. She breathed. And I'm very tired, and I'm also more awake than I've been in 2 years, and I'm not sure what to do with both of those things at the same time. He looked at her. Come on, he said. Let's go. She called Agent Flores from the car. She described the meeting, the Meridian Holdings document, Daniel's confirmation of the beneficiary structure. Flores listened without interrupting, and when Elena finished, there was a pause that had a specific quality, the pause of someone who has just received a piece that completes something they have been building for a long time. This is enough, Flores said. With Cross's cooperation and this document, we have what we need to move on Mercer and grow. I'm going to need you to come in this afternoon to formalize what you just told me. I'll be there at 2, Elena said. She hung up. Adrian was driving. He had heard the call. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, It's done. The legal part isn't done, she said. That'll take months. I know, he said. But the part where Daniel Cross has any power over what happens to you, that part is done. She looked out the window. She thought about the woman on the bathroom floor with her phone, and her shame, and her careful inventory of everyone she could not call. She thought about how long it had taken to get from that floor to this car. 3 days. 3 days that had contained more clarity and more terror and more action and more genuine human connection than the previous 2 years combined. Adrian, she said. He looked at her briefly, then back at the road. I need to ask you something, she said. And I need you to answer it honestly, not carefully. All right, he said. When this is over, when the federal case is resolved and the legal proceedings are done, and life goes back to something that resembles normal, what do you think happens? He was quiet for a moment. Between us, he said. Yes. He drove for a few seconds without answering. She had asked the question deliberately in the car, so that he had to look at the road, and she could look at him without the full weight of direct eye contact, making either of them perform their answer. I think, he said, that you're going to need time, actual time, to rebuild things that were taken from you. Your sense of your own judgment, your trust in your own perceptions. Those things don't come back overnight, and anyone who tells you they do is not someone you should trust. He paused. I think you're going to do that rebuilding because you've been doing it since the moment you got in the car 3 nights ago, faster than most people manage it in months. And I think you're going to come out of it someone who knows exactly what she wants and isn't willing to take less than that. She waited. And then, she said. He glanced at her. And then? He said, I would very much like to take you to dinner. Under circumstances where nobody is being investigated and you are not technically my employee and we are simply 2 people sitting across a table. She looked at him. Not technically your employee, she said. I've been thinking about that, he said. The situation as it stands is not appropriate on multiple levels. Paul can recommend a placement firm. The role you were doing was too small for you anyway. It was too small for you 3 years ago. You're firing me, she said. I'm telling you, "That your professional abilities significantly exceed what I've been making use of them for," he said, "and that I intend to help you find a position that reflects that, whether at Sterling Consulting or somewhere else." A pause. "And that separately from all of that, at some point when the timing is appropriate, I would like to have dinner." She looked at him for a long moment. "That is a very controlled way to say something," she said. "I'm a controlled person," he said. "I've noticed," she said. She looked back out the window. "Yes," she said. "Yes, to which part?" he said. "Both," she said. "All of it." She heard something shift in his breathing, very slightly. The specific sound of a controlled person allowing themselves one small, unmanaged moment. Neither of them said anything else for the rest of the drive. They did not need to. The FBI office at 2 o'clock was everything the last 4 days had been leading toward. Elena sat across from Agent Flores, and a colleague named Brennan, and a federal attorney whose name she did not catch. And she answered every question with the precision and completeness of a woman who had spent the last 72 hours organizing her own history into a coherent and documented timeline. She did not hedge. She did not soften. She did not apologize for the things she had not known when she did not know them. She told the truth, the full shape of it, from the first dinner with Daniel to the moment she had walked out of Paul's conference room 4 hours ago. It took 2 hours and 17 minutes. When she was done, Agent Flores looked at her across the table. "You understand," Flores said, "that your cooperation here is going to be central to the prosecution's case." "I understand," Elena said. "You may be called to testify." "I know. It will be public. Your name will be on the record." "I know," Elena said again. "That's fine." Flores looked at her for a moment with the expression Elena had seen on her face twice before, the private assessment of someone who has seen a great many people in this position and is deciding where this one lands. "You know," Flores said, "most people who come in having been through what you've been through spend the first half of the interview working up to the things they find hardest to say. You started with them." "I had a few days to get used to saying them," Elena said. Flores nodded. "We'll be in touch," she said. Elena stood up. She shook Flores's hand. She walked out. Paul called at 6 p.m. with the first piece of concrete news. Carl Mercer had been contacted by federal investigators. Seth Groh had retained a criminal defense attorney, which meant he understood what was coming and was already positioning. Daniel Cross had signed the cooperation agreement at 4:45 p.m., and his attorney had delivered the first tranche of documentation, account structures, transaction records, communication logs, which Paul described as substantial. "How substantial?" Elena asked. "Enough." Paul said that Agent Flores used the word conclusive, which for federal investigators is not a word they use lightly. She sat with that. "What about the account in my name?" she said. "The Meridian beneficiary designation. Both will be challenged and voided on the basis of identity theft and fraudulent beneficiary assignment," Paul said. "The forensic accountant has already prepared the formal documentation. Your exposure there is minimal and manageable. And the drive from my office desk. The fabricated communications have been submitted alongside the metadata analysis that establishes their fraudulent origin," Paul said. "Flores has confirmed they will not be treated as genuine evidence against you." She breathed. She let the breath out slowly. "Paul," she said, "thank you." "Elena," he said, "this is my job. But also, you're welcome." She hung up. She was in the guest room. She had retreated there after they returned from the FBI office, partly from exhaustion and partly from the specific need to be somewhere quiet and contained, while she processed the weight of the afternoon. She sat on the edge of the bed. She thought about all of it, the full arc of it beginning to end. She thought about the 2 years, and she thought about the bathroom floor, and she thought about the moment she had pressed that number and waited through 2 rings, and heard Adrian's voice say, "Who is this?" Not a question. A statement. The voice of a man who received calls at all hours and was never quite startled. She thought about the choice she had almost not made. She thought about what the cost of not making it would have been. The federal case collapsing without its connective tissue. The account and the drive and the fabricated emails becoming eventually her story instead of his. Daniel walking away from everything intact because the one person who knew the shape of his method from the inside had been too frightened and too ashamed to open the door. She thought about what it meant that one phone call made at 1:13 in the morning from a bathroom floor by a woman who was not sure she deserved the help she was asking for had changed the direction of all of it. Not because Adrian Voss was powerful. Not because Paul Reston was meticulous. Not because Diana Cho was brilliant, or Flores was thorough, or Priya answered on the second ring. Because Elena had made the call. She had been afraid, and she had made it anyway. She had been ashamed, and she had made it anyway. She had spent 2 years being convinced that her voice was unreliable, and her perceptions were skewed, and her judgment was not to be trusted, and she had picked up the phone, and she had used it, and everything that followed had flowed from that one decision. She was thinking about the specific, irreducible power of one woman deciding to stop being quiet when the knock came at the guest room door. "Come in," she said. Adrian opened the door. He had a glass of water and a look that she had catalogued by now into a specific meaning, checking, not managing. There was a difference, and she had learned it. "Paul called you," he said. "Yes." And it's moving," she said. "Grow has a defense attorney. Mercer has been contacted. Daniel's documentation is in Flores's hands." She paused. "It's going to take a while, but the direction is clear." He nodded. He came in and set the water on the nightstand and straightened up and looked at her. "How are you doing with it?" he said. "I'm doing," she said. "That's the most honest answer." He sat in the chair across from her, not close with the same deliberate distance he had maintained since the first night, the distance of a person who understood exactly what he was and was not being invited into and respected the line precisely. "I called Marcus again this afternoon," he said. She looked at him. "How is he?" "Relieved," Adrian said. "And angrier than I expected on your behalf. He said..." He paused. "He said that people who use other people as infrastructure deserve what's coming to them." A beat. He's not wrong. "People who use other people as infrastructure," she repeated. It's how he put it. She thought about that phrase. Infrastructure. The word landed somewhere specific, not painful, not flattering, just precise. She had been infrastructure. A load-bearing element in someone else's structure, invisible and essential, and never consulted about the weight she was being asked to carry. "I'm not infrastructure anymore," she said. "No," Adrian said. "You're not." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "For 3 days ago. For being in the hallway today when you were supposed to be in the building. For the food at 1 a.m. and the doctor and Paul and Diana and all of it." She held his gaze. "I know you said you didn't need a reason beyond me being frightened. But I want you to know that I see what you did, the full scope of it, and I'm not going to pretend I don't know what that cost in terms of time and attention and exposure." He was quiet for a moment. "It didn't cost me anything I wasn't willing to spend," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what I'm thanking you for." He looked at her with the expression she had decided was his honest one, not the controlled professional face and not the careful measured tone, but the look underneath those things that appeared occasionally when he had decided to stop performing composure and simply have it. "Dinner," he said. "The offer stands, whenever you're ready." "I know it does," she said. "And the placement firm." "I know that too," she said. "Give me a month." "A month," he said. "To get through the initial federal proceedings and move back into my own space and remember what it feels like to make choices that are completely mine." She paused. "And then dinner." He nodded. He stood up. He walked to the door. "Adrian," she said. He turned. She looked at him across the room at the man who had picked up a phone at 1 a.m. and asked, "Where are you?" instead of "What do you want?" Who had arrived in 12 minutes. Who had said, "Get in the car. You're safe now," and meant all three of those things precisely. "I'm glad I called you," she said. He looked at her for a moment that was completely unmanaged. "So am I," he said. He pulled the door almost closed behind him, and she heard him walk down the hall, and she sat in the quiet of the guest room, and she breathed in and out, and she let herself feel the full weight and full lightness of everything the last 72 hours had made possible. 3 months later, Elena Marquez sat across a conference table at Sterling Consulting and presented a proposal she had been developing for 6 weeks to a room of 7 people, including Richard Holt, and spoke for 45 minutes without once adjusting her volume or her word choice to accommodate anyone else's comfort. The proposal was accepted before she left the building. She called Camilla from the street outside and listened to her sister make a sound that was somewhere between a cheer and a sob, and felt in that moment the specific, uncomplicated joy of a good thing happening to someone who had gone through enough bad ones to know the difference. She called her mother. Rosa Marquez said, "I knew it," in the way mothers say things they have believed for a long time and are finally being proved right about. She called Priya, who had just transferred to a new department and had opinions about it that took 20 minutes to fully articulate, and which Elena listened to with the focused attention of a person who has rediscovered the pleasure of being present in someone else's life. She did not call Daniel Cross. She had not spoken to him since the conference room. She had communicated with his legal team through Paul's office as necessary, and she had testified in the preliminary federal hearing with the same clarity and completeness she had brought to Flores's office, and she had not looked for his reaction to any of it, because his reactions were no longer information she needed. The Mercer case was still active. It would be for some time. Federal financial conspiracy cases moved on their own timeline, patient and thorough and impervious to the urgency of individuals. But the direction was not in question. That evening, she walked into a restaurant she had chosen herself, arrived 2 minutes early, sat at a table by the window, and looked up when the door opened. Adrian Voss walked in. Not the professional version, not the controlled public face. The version she had come to know in 3 days of the most compressed and clarifying experience of her adult life. The man who read physical newspapers at 1 a.m. and listened completely, and stood in hallways when he had said he would be in buildings and called his brother. When someone told him that silence was the same mechanism as control, regardless of intention. He sat down across from her. He looked at her. She looked back. "You look different," he said. "Good different," or "like yourself," he said. "That's what I mean." She understood that. She picked up the menu, and he picked up his, and the waiter came, and the evening began with the specific, unhurried quality of 2 people who have already been through the hardest version of knowing each other and have arrived at something quieter and more chosen on the other side. They talked for 3 hours. Not about Daniel, not about the case, not about the account or the drive or Mercer or any part of the machinery that had brought them to this table by a route neither of them would have predicted. They talked about the books on his shelves. They talked about the neighborhood in Queens where Elena had grown up, and whether the coffee shop on the corner she remembered from childhood was still there. They talked about Marcus and his family in Seattle, and the conversation Adrian had in the hallway of Paul's office, in which his brother had said with the direct simplicity of someone who had known Adrian for 40 years, that it sounded like you finally found someone worth standing in hallways for. They talked until the restaurant was nearly empty, and the waiter had refilled their water 4 times, with the particular patience of someone who could see that the people at table 7 were not going to be rushed. When they walked out into the night, Elena stopped on the sidewalk and looked up for a moment at the sky, at the specific texture of a New York night in October, cool and lit with the ambient glow of a city that never fully darkened. She thought about 1:13 a.m. and a bathroom floor, and a phone call she had almost not made. She thought about all the ways fear had kept her in smaller spaces than she deserved. She thought about the woman who had spent 2 years disappearing, and the woman standing here right now, and the distance between those 2 people, which was not time exactly, not circumstance exactly, but something more specific and harder to name. Choice. It was choice. The decision made in the darkest and most frightened moment of her adult life to reach for something instead of staying still. Everything else had followed from that. Adrian stood beside her on the sidewalk. He did not take her hand. He stood close enough that she could feel the steadiness of him, that particular quality she had recognized on the first night, and had spent 3 months understanding better, not the steadiness of someone who had never been afraid, but the steadiness of someone who had decided not to let fear make his decisions. She understood that quality now in a way she had not then. She had earned the understanding. "Same time next week," she said. He looked at her. "Same time next week," he said. She nodded. She looked back at the street. She was Elena Marquez. She had survived something that was designed to destroy her. She had walked into the fire that was waiting, and she had named every piece of it out loud, and she had let the right people hear her name it. And the fire had not in the end been what took her down. She had stood up when standing was the hardest thing she had ever done. She had made the call. She had opened the door. She had told the truth. And the woman who had whispered, "Please come get me," from a bathroom floor at 1 a.m., shaking and ashamed, and not sure she deserved to be rescued. That woman had not needed rescuing at all. She had needed a witness. She had needed someone to stand beside her while she rescued herself. And she had. She had done exactly that. And nobody, not Daniel Cross, not Carl Mercer, not the 2 years of careful systematic erasure, not the fake emails, or the drained accounts, or the identity built in her name for someone else's insurance. Nobody was ever going to take that from her. That was hers. That would always be hers.